At dinner, I said. Can't wait for the family reunion. My wife's sister laughed. You're not invited. It's for real family. Everyone laughed. I just smiled and left. 4 days later, my wife tried to withdraw $2. For 100, I sent a screenshot. Payment denied. Must be that family-only policy. 2 days later, I heard a loud knock on my door. If there's a Guinness World Record for most emotionally damaging dinner, my wife's family could have claimed the trophy decades ago. Family dinner nights at the Myers household were like group therapy run by people who needed therapy but thought prayer, passive-aggressive comments, and boxed wine counted as healing. Every time Claire said, "Babe, Mom's cooking dinner for everyone Saturday night," I'd feel my soul start packing its bags. That Saturday, I could already tell it was going to be one of those evenings that made me question my life choices. You know that weird dread that hits when you're halfway into your work week, and someone says the word potluck? Multiply that by 10 and throw in an overcooked roast. Claire was buzzing around our bedroom, getting ready like she was auditioning for Real Housewives of the Suburbs. Curling iron in one hand, lip gloss in the other, rehearsing fake compliments in the mirror. "Your mom's new curtains are so cute," she practiced, trying to make it sound genuine. It didn't. Meanwhile, I was sitting on the bed, tying my shoes, wondering if faking food poisoning was still morally acceptable in marriage. We drove over in tense silence, her scrolling Instagram, me mentally preparing like a soldier heading into battle. The moment we pulled into her parents' driveway, that familiar smell of barbecue seasoning and generational resentment hit me. The house looked like it hadn't changed since 1998. Same beige siding, same squeaky porch swing, same yard gnome that looked like it was plotting my death. "Smile," Claire whispered as we walked up the steps. "They'll notice if you're moody." Moody. That's her word for barely tolerating emotional terrorism with good posture. Barbara, my mother-in-law, opened the door wearing a floral apron and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "There's my favorite couple," she chirped, which was funny because last week she called me, "that man your daughter married," during a phone call I accidentally overheard. Inside, the dining table was already set with the good china, the kind that only comes out for special occasions or when Barbara wants to flex her imaginary wealth. Roast beef steamed at the center like the sacrificial offering it was. Cheap red wine filled mismatched glasses. And seated around the table were all the usual suspects. Frank, her dad, retired, opinionated, and chronically allergic to accountability. Brianna, the oldest sister, thinks sarcasm counts as a personality. Lucy, the youngest, quiet, observant, probably wondering how she got stuck with these people in the genetic lottery. And me, the outsider who somehow keeps funding the circus. I plastered on my best fake smile. "Hey, everyone." Brianna looked up from her phone. "Wow, you actually showed up." "Yeah," I said, setting down the bottle of decent wine I'd brought. I figured somebody should upgrade the selection. Claire elbowed me. "Be nice." "I am being nice." I didn't bring the good one. Dinner started with small talk, which in that family means thinly disguised competition. Brianna bragged about her new promotion at a company nobody's heard of. Frank talked about how hard it is being retired. Barbara talked about how she doesn't like to brag, but everyone at church keeps complimenting her hair. It was like being trapped inside a Hallmark movie written by narcissists. The roast beef was edible. The potatoes, surprisingly creamy. For about 15 glorious minutes, it was almost peaceful. Then, because I have the survival instincts of a Labrador chasing traffic, I opened my mouth. "So," I said casually, "can't wait for the family reunion next weekend." If silence had a temperature, that moment dropped to sub-zero. Brianna froze mid-chew, exchanged glances with her parents, and then slowly turned toward me with a smirk that screamed, "Watch this." "Oh," she said sweetly, "you're not invited. It's for real family." The table erupted in laughter like a bad sitcom audience cue. Even Frank chuckled, trying to look like he wasn't enjoying it too much. Barbara covered her mouth, pretending she was horrified but clearly delighted. And then Claire, my wife, laughed too. Not a nervous chuckle. Not a "let's diffuse this" giggle. A full-on laugh. "Oh, come on," she said between giggles, patting my arm like I was a toddler throwing a tantrum. "Don't be dramatic, babe." The laughter kept echoing. My fork hovered midair, the roast beef on it looking like the last shred of my dignity. I stared around the table at all of them. These people who had borrowed money from me, who'd called me to fix leaky roofs and cover unexpected bills. And here they were, laughing at me like I was the family mascot. I smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was the kind of smile you practice in front of a mirror before a murder trial. Good one, I said evenly. Real family. Nice touch. Brianna, sensing blood in the water, doubled down. Oh, don't take it personal. You're just more of a guest star, you know? Guest star, I repeated. Right. Must have missed that in the wedding vows. Claire rolled her eyes. Oh, please. It was just a joke. Sure, I said, sipping my wine. And heart attacks are just chest high fives. Nobody laughed this time. Barbara shifted uncomfortably. Lucy glanced at me with that I'm sorry my family's feral look. That's when I decided I was done playing along. For years, I'd been the punchline guy, the easygoing husband who'd eat the insults along with the mashed potatoes. But something inside me snapped, quietly, like a switch flipping. I set my fork down, folded my napkin neatly beside the plate, and pushed back my chair. Claire blinked. Where are you going? Dinner's not over. Yeah, I said. I think for me it is. Barbara frowned. Oh, don't be silly. Brianna was just teasing. Teasing, I repeated. Right. Is that what you call group humiliation now? Cute rebrand. Brianna scoffed. You're seriously leaving? You can't take a joke. Oh, I can take jokes, I said. I've been married into this family for 7 years. That's a joke endurance course. That one landed. Even Lucy snorted. Frank's jaw tightened. You're being disrespectful in my house. Technically, I said, the bank's house. But point taken. Claire hissed. Can we not do this right now? Sure, I said lightly, picking up my jacket. We can schedule it between the reunion I'm not invited to and the next time your dad needs help fixing his credit. The silence that followed could have qualified as spiritual. You could hear the tick of Barbara's decorative wall clock, every second a tiny applause for my restraint. I smiled one last time, nodded at Lucy, and headed for the door. Behind me, Brianna muttered, drama queen. I turned just enough to say, and you're the family jester. Guess we both have roles. The look on her face? Worth every unpaid therapy session. When I stepped outside, the night air felt like freedom, cold, honest, unfiltered. I stood on that porch for a second, breathing it in like oxygen after years underwater. My car was parked under the flickering streetlight, which felt poetic in a depressing kind of way. As I drove home, I didn't turn on the radio. Didn't need to. My thoughts were loud enough. I replayed the scene in my head like a movie I couldn't stop watching. Every laugh, every smirk, every time I brushed it off in the past because that's just how they are. But no, that's not how family acts. That's how parasites act, with table manners. When I got home, I poured myself a whiskey. Double, neat, and sat in the dark. No TV, no music, just silence. The kind that lets your thoughts get louder until you can't ignore them anymore. I thought about the early years, when I first met Claire, when her family pretended to like me because I was new and shiny. Back then, I thought their teasing was just part of their charm. But charm fades when the jokes always cut in the same direction. What hurt wasn't Brianna's comment. It wasn't Frank's smug laugh or Barbara's fake shock. It was Claire's reaction, the way she joined in like it was nothing. Like my humiliation was background noise. That was the moment something inside me shifted permanently. I realized I'd been trying to earn a place in a club that never intended to give me a membership card. And for what? Approval? Validation? The illusion of unity? Screw that. I wasn't angry, not exactly. Anger burns fast. What I felt was colder, steadier. It's the kind of calm that makes people nervous because they can't predict what comes next. I looked at the clock, 10:17 p.m., and smiled to myself. Tonight, I stopped being the clown they laughed at. I stopped being the free emotional labor, the fixer, the guy who doesn't mind. Tonight, I became the audience. And audiences don't beg for inclusion. They watch. They take notes. And eventually, when the show gets too bad, they walk out. I sipped my whiskey, leaned back, and whispered into the dark, show's over. But in truth, it wasn't. It was just intermission. You know what's funny? Not jokes. Jokes have punchlines, timing, a setup that at least pretends to make sense. What happened to me was more like a slow burn prank, one so well coordinated that even I, the guy who planned half of it, didn't realize I was the butt until the curtain dropped. Here's the thing about family. They always say blood is thicker than water, but nobody tells you what to do when that blood starts acting like it's after your wallet. See, I was the guy who always showed up, the one who picked up the tab, who offered help before being asked. Claire's family loved to call me reliable. Now I know that's code for the idiot who keeps paying. The family reunion was supposed to be my redemption arc. After years of being the background husband, the plus one who got laughed at for not knowing every inside joke, I thought maybe organizing something special would change that. Some twisted part of me believed that effort equaled acceptance. I'd even written mend bridges at the top of my to-do list that week, like I was managing a damn PR campaign instead of my in-laws' dysfunction. So I went all in. I searched for weeks, scrolling through rental listings like a travel agent with trust issues. Finally, I found it. A rustic lake cabin about 2 hours away, big enough for everyone, surrounded by pine trees and fake peace. It even had a hot tub, because apparently, rich people soak to forget their problems, and this family definitely needed to forget a few. I handled everything. Checked dates, called everyone individually, because Lord forbid these people reply in a group chat, and got everyone to confirm. Claire said, "Wow, babe, that's so thoughtful." Her mom texted a thumbs-up emoji, which is basically her version of a love letter. Even Brianna managed to send a cool, "can't wait," before disappearing into whatever vortex self-absorbed people live in. So, I paid the deposit. Half up front, non-refundable. My card. My money. No complaints. No split-the-bill Venmo requests. Just me being the usual idiot who thought generosity could earn him basic respect. For a few days, it actually felt good. The group chat was lively. Lucy was asking about groceries. Frank was rambling about bringing his famous grill set. And Barbara was debating which matching sweaters to buy for family photos. I was naive enough to smile at my phone like it was a newborn child. Then, one morning, the chat went silent. Dead silent. At first, I thought maybe everyone was just busy, but hours turned into days. I sent a message. "Hey, just checking, should I confirm final payment with the cabin host?" No response. Another day, another message. Need to finalize headcount. Who's in? Nothing. The typing bubble popped up once, probably an accidental butt text, and vanished like a ghost. It felt like being left on read by your own family. A week later, I came home to find Claire humming in the kitchen, making pasta like life was normal. "So," I asked casually, "what's the deal with the reunion?" Everyone ghosted me. She froze for half a second, just enough time for me to catch it, then smiled. "Oh, that. Yeah, I think they decided to restructure things a little." "Restructure?" I repeated. "Like a corporate layoff?" She shrugged, sprinkling Parmesan like she was snowing guilt onto the counter. "They just wanted something smaller this year. Less stress, you know." "Smaller," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "And by smaller, you mean what exactly?" She didn't meet my eyes. "Just family. Immediate family." "Immediate family," I said. "So, the same people who were all in the chat 2 weeks ago?" "Don't make it weird," she said quickly. "It's not personal." "Not personal," I repeated, laughing. "Sure. Because excluding the person who planned and paid for it definitely screams professional decision." She looked irritated now, which was rich considering I was the one being robbed. "You're overreacting," she said. "It's just one weekend." "One weekend," I said, "that I organized, funded, and moved my work schedule around for so your dad could bring his grill and your mom could pose with sweaters." "Don't be dramatic." There it was again, my least favorite sentence in the English language. I swear if "don't be dramatic" had a face, I'd punch it. I walked over to the counter, poured myself a drink, and asked the question that had been burning a hole in my patience. "So what happened to the deposit?" She hesitated, then gave that nervous laugh women give when they're about to lie but want to sound casual. "Oh, Mom handled it. I think she just, transferred it to the new reservation." I froze. "The new reservation?" "Yeah, same cabin, different booking," she said quickly, looking anywhere but at me. "I think she just, took care of it." "You mean she took my booking?" I said slowly. "And used my money." Claire sighed. "Babe, please, it's not that serious." "Not that serious," I said, nodding. "Right. You're right. It's not like I got publicly laughed at last week, and now I'm getting financially mugged by my in-laws. Totally fine." She crossed her arms. "You're making this a big deal." "Oh, it is a big deal," I said, "because now I finally get the joke." She frowned. "What joke?" "The one I didn't know I was in," I said. "Apparently, I'm the family ATM, and I didn't even charge withdrawal fees. She rolled her eyes. You always twist things into drama. I stared at her, amazed. This woman could teach a masterclass in gaslighting. Claire, I said carefully, do you realize how insane it is to use someone's money for a trip and not invite them? She opened her mouth, probably to say something about me being too sensitive, but I cut her off. No, seriously. If someone robbed a bank and then sent the teller a thank you card, that'd make more sense than this. She turned away, muttering, you wouldn't understand. Oh, trust me, I said. I'm starting to understand just fine. That's when it hit me. The clarity of betrayal mixed with the bitter comedy of it all. They'd played me like a cheap violin, and I'd handed them the bow. The family that laughed at me over dinner had graduated to stealing from me with a smile. For the rest of that evening, I stayed quiet. Let her cook. Let her pretend everything was fine. I ate dinner like a man attending his own roast. And the whole time, I kept thinking about how easily they'd all gone along with it. No hesitation, no guilt, just quiet coordination behind my back. The next day, I checked my credit card account. Sure enough, there it was, Cabin Lakeside Resort, $1,200 deposit. I stared at the charge, at the timestamp, at my own name attached to the joke. It was almost poetic, like karma had a sense of humor. That's when I realized something important. I wasn't family. I was the family funding. They didn't see me as a person, they saw me as a service. Need roof repairs? Call the son-in-law. Need tuition? Text him. Need a vacation deposit? Oh, he's good for it. For years, I justified it. They're just struggling. They'll pay me back eventually. It's what family does. Nah, family helps you. Parasites drain you. And parasites rarely say thank you. That night, I poured another drink and opened the group chat. I scrolled through every message, every thanks, every you're the best, every fake little heart emoji. Then I took a screenshot of my payment receipt and sent it to the chat with one line. Hope you all have fun. You're welcome. Then I left the chat. It was petty. It was impulsive. And it felt fantastic. Claire came into the living room 10 minutes later, holding her phone like it was radioactive. What did you do? Set the record straight, I said. Her tone sharpened. You're embarrassing me. Good, I said. Now we're even. She glared. You're making a scene. I laughed. Honey, I'm not making a scene. I'm just turning on the lights. She stormed off to call her mom. I could hear muffled shouting from the other room. Barbara probably spinning it into another episode of the Martyr Chronicles. Meanwhile, I sat back, sipped my whiskey, and smiled. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't the one scrambling to make peace. I'd finally learned the rule no one tells you. When people treat your kindness like a weakness, stop being kind. You don't need to raise your voice. Just raise your boundaries. By midnight, the guilt texts started rolling in. First from Lucy. I'm so sorry. I didn't know they used your card. Then from Brianna. Wow, dude, dramatic much? And finally from Barbara herself. This is very immature behavior for someone who's supposed to be part of the family. I stared at that last message and actually laughed out loud. Part of the family. Right. The part that pays, not the part that plays. I typed back one sentence. Didn't realize I was applying for membership. Then I turned my phone off. That night, lying in bed next to Claire, who was still fuming, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not the spiritual, yoga mat kind. The kind that comes when you finally stop caring about being liked by people who don't respect you. Because here's the truth no one admits. When you stop trying to fit into other people's version of family, you finally start finding your own. And yeah, maybe they thought they'd excluded me from their precious little weekend, but the joke's on them. They didn't cut me out. They freed me. For days after the great family-only revelation, I woke up to the soothing sound of Claire yelling at her phone like it owed her money. Which, ironically, it kind of did. The morning started innocent enough. Coffee brewing, sun coming through the blinds, me trying to convince myself that adult life still had purpose. Then I heard the unmistakable tone of my wife's outrage echoing from the kitchen. What do you mean transaction declined? She snapped. It was the kind of tone usually reserved for traffic cops and Starbucks baristas who dare spell her name wrong. I leaned against the doorway, sipping my coffee, and asked, Everything okay, sweetheart? She turned, face pale, holding her phone like it had just betrayed her. The emergency fund card isn't working. She said it like she'd just discovered gravity stopped working too. Now, the emergency fund was my pride and joy. Built over 3 years of cutting corners, late-night freelance gigs, and a whole lot of self-control. It wasn't glamorous money, it was grown-up money. The kind you build for broken transmissions, medical bills, or sudden life disasters. You know, real emergencies. Except in Claire's dictionary. Emergency apparently included designer handbags and last-minute family contributions. How much were you trying to take out? I asked, already suspecting the answer would raise my blood pressure. 2,400, she said without flinching, like that was the most normal number in the world. Mom's organizing the reunion supplies, and she needed a little help with the rental van and groceries. 6:30 p.m. ding-dong. Now, under normal circumstances, the sound of a doorbell means pizza, a delivery, or Jehovah's Witnesses with perfect timing. But when your ex-fiancée recently left you for her boss and then got locked out of your streaming accounts, it usually means something worse. I looked at the doorbell camera feed on my phone, and there she was, Lily, standing on my porch like a Hallmark movie reject. Waterproof mascara had clearly failed the quality assurance test, and she was holding 2 suitcases and the kind of regret that could fuel an entire therapy convention. I leaned back on the couch, sipped my beer, and whispered, well, if it isn't the CEO of Poor Decisions Incorporated. For a solid minute, I debated pretending I wasn't home. But curiosity won, because if karma ever hand-delivers entertainment to your doorstep, you open the curtain and enjoy the show. I walked to the door but kept the chain lock on, because I wasn't about to get ambushed by nostalgia or guilt, or worse, her perfume. Jamie kicked me out, she sobbed. Her voice cracked like a sad violin played by an amateur. He said he needs time to process everything. Already, I said, raising an eyebrow. Wow, the man moves fast. I guess promotions at that company have a probation period too. Her eyes darted around, embarrassed, angry, desperate. All the stages of regret in under 10 seconds. It's complicated, she sniffled. He said he's confused. He's married, Oliver. I didn't know until yesterday. Translation, he's trying to save his own ass. I said, nodding like a therapist who's just diagnosed stupidity. So, what you're saying is, he needs time to explain to his wife why he suddenly has a pregnant intern living in his guest room. She flinched. That's not fair. Neither is life, Lily. But it's honest. Her face scrunched up like she was about to unleash a guilt trip, but I was already 5 steps ahead. You can't just cut me off like this, she said, clutching her belly for dramatic effect, like she thought the pregnancy card was the ultimate cheat code. I folded my arms. You moved in with your boss, pregnant with his baby, and told me about it during business hours. I'm just respecting your new LinkedIn life choice. You chose corporate housing, remember? Just for tonight, she pleaded. Please, Oliver. I have nowhere else to go. I leaned slightly forward, keeping the chain tight. Sorry, occupancy's full. Try the HR department. Maybe they can do an employee wellness check. Her expression twisted into disbelief. You're heartless. No, I said. I just learned boundaries. I closed the door gently, letting the chain rattle for emphasis. She banged on it, shouting my name like I was some kind of rom-com hero about to chase her through the rain. But this wasn't a Nicholas Sparks movie. This was real life, and my popcorn was getting cold. I turned up the volume on my TV. The sound of the Office theme song drowned out her crying. Honestly, it was beautiful, like a meditation app that finally worked. She eventually stopped knocking. The camera showed her sitting on the porch steps, mascara streaked and scrolling her phone, probably texting every person in her contacts list for a backup couch. I imagined the message. Need a place to stay, temporarily homeless but emotionally available. About an hour later, she left. The headlights of an Uber lit up the driveway, and she dragged her suitcases away, head low. The universe gave me a parting gift, the soft thud of her heel breaking as she stumbled onto the curb. I raised my beer. Cheers to gravity and karma. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter, like someone had vacuumed the emotional dust out of my life. I brewed coffee, opened the blinds, and there it was again, silence. The kind that felt earned. But peace, my friend, never lasts long when drama knows your address. Around 10 a.m., my phone buzzed. New text, unknown number. I didn't even have to open it to know. Please, I made a mistake. Jamie lied about everything. I can't afford this motel. There it was. The Desperation Trilogy. I screenshotted them all, and put them in a folder titled Future Comedy Material. Maybe one day, I'd read them during my best man's speech, at someone else's wedding, obviously. By noon, my phone was vibrating like a blender. She was borrowing phones now, friends, co-workers, probably her sister. The messages ranged from manipulative to pathetic. Then her sister Zoe called my work line. My work line. The audacity. I answered, voice professional. Oliver Bennett speaking. Don't act formal with me, she snapped. Lily told me everything. You're heartless. She's pregnant and homeless. I leaned back in my chair. Homeless? She moved out voluntarily. That's called remote work. You're unbelievable, she said. She's carrying a child. Yeah, and she's also carrying the consequences of her decisions. Big difference. Click. End of conversation. 5 minutes later, her mom called. Because of course she did. Oliver, how could you throw a pregnant woman out on the street? I sighed. Elaine, she threw herself out. I just changed the locks. You should be ashamed of yourself, she shouted. Trust me, I was. For about 5 years. Then she moved in with her boss and cured me. She gasped so dramatically I thought she might pass out. I ended the call before she started quoting scripture. By lunchtime, my coworkers were whispering. You can always tell when gossip starts circulating. The break room goes quiet when you walk in, and people suddenly discover the fascinating art of stirring coffee in silence. I heard snippets, heartless, sociopath, emotional detachment. I smiled. People say those things like they're insults, but I call it mental cybersecurity. You learn to firewall your feelings after enough malware, disguised as love, tries to log in. That evening, I met up with Mason for drinks. He'd been dying to hear the sequel. So, let me get this straight, he said between sips. She cheated, got pregnant, moved in with her boss, got kicked out, and now she's trying to move back in with you? Correct, I said, nodding. Apparently, my house is now her backup server. He whistled. Damn, that's bold. I wouldn't even have the confidence to ask my ex for Wi-Fi, let alone housing. She's got gall, I'll give her that. He leaned in. You gonna cave? I gave him a look that could have frozen lava. Mason, I changed the locks. I revoked her Prime account. I'm this close to calling NASA to remove her from the planet. He laughed so hard the bartender looked over. You're evil, bro. Evil? Nah, just organized. When I got home that night, I checked my doorbell camera again out of habit. No crying ex, no emotional blackmail, just peace. Beautiful, uneventful peace. I poured a drink, sat back, and thought about how quickly tables can turn. 1 week ago, she was choosing champagne flutes for our wedding registry. Now she was probably Googling cheap extended stay motels with breakfast. The poetic symmetry almost made me emotional. Almost. I'll be honest, though, there was a weird satisfaction in knowing I didn't break down, didn't beg, didn't turn into the cliché guy sending 3 a.m. I miss you texts. I handled it with grace and sarcasm, the two greatest weapons of the emotionally evolved. Still, there's something wild about how fast a relationship can implode. You think you know someone, and then one day they're standing on your porch crying, and you realize the person you loved might have just been a really convincing improv actor. Later that night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, same one I'd stared at during the call. Only now it wasn't spinning regret, it was circulating relief. I thought about what she'd said on the phone that day. You're not going to fight for me? And I laughed. Because that's what she never understood. I don't fight for people who walk themselves out of my life. I'm not a warrior. I'm a man with decent Wi-Fi and boundaries. By midnight, I was out cold, sleeping deeper than I had in months. No overthinking, no checking my phone, no wondering if I'd done enough. I'd done plenty. The universe was finally on Do Not Disturb. And as for Lily, she was probably discovering that the grass isn't greener. It's just more expensive and comes with a boss named Jamie. The next morning, I woke up refreshed, made breakfast, and thought, if peace had a flavor, it'd taste like bacon and justice. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't loud. It's locking the door, changing the Wi-Fi password, and letting the crying intern learn what happens when you underestimate the quiet guy who keeps receipts. The next morning started like most of my post-breakup mornings. Coffee strong enough to strip paint, quiet apartment, and a vague sense that peace was finally legal again. That was until my phone started buzzing like it had a personal vendetta. I thought maybe my Amazon delivery was early or my boss was pretending to care about productivity again. But no, it was messages, lots of them. Random numbers. Unfamiliar area codes. Clearly, Lily was borrowing phones like a college freshman borrows Wi-Fi. I opened one text. Please, I made a mistake. Then another. Jamie lied about everything. A third one sealed it. I can't afford this motel. I swear, you could almost smell the desperation through the screen. I stared at the text like a scientist studying a new species of audacity. No replies, of course. I took screenshots, neatly labeled, and saved in a folder titled Future Comedy Material. I had plans for these. Maybe I'd frame them. Maybe I'd read them aloud at my next poker night. Gentlemen, tonight's entertainment. Exhibit A, The Chronicles of a Clueless Fiancé. By 10 a.m., she'd escalated to voice calls. Unknown numbers again. I didn't answer. I wasn't about to get sucked into some emotional TED talk about forgiveness. But just when I thought she'd finally run out of prepaid phone minutes, my work phone rang. My work phone. I picked it up, and before I could even say hello, I heard the voice, her sister Zoe, sounding like she'd been waiting her whole life for this confrontation. You're heartless, she snapped. Lily's pregnant and homeless. I nearly choked on my coffee. Homeless. I repeated, feigning shock. I thought she moved out voluntarily. Isn't that called remote work now? There was a stunned silence. You think this is funny? She hissed. No, I said calmly. I think it's called consequences. Click. End of call. I sat there, grinning like a man who just won an argument with gravity. Not 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. Lily's mom. Of course. Because every bad sitcom needs a meddling mother-in-law figure. Oliver, how could you? She began, her voice trembling with righteous fury. You threw a pregnant woman into the streets. I sighed dramatically, swirling my coffee like a villain in a soap opera. Elaine, I said, let's be accurate. She threw herself into the streets. I just changed the locks. She made a mistake, she cried. We all do. Right, I said. But some of us don't call our exes about it after. She gasped so loudly I thought she'd inhaled her pearls. I ended the call before she started quoting Bible verses about mercy. I'm not saying I'm allergic to guilt trips, but I'd rather sit in rush hour traffic listening to an MLM pitch. By lunch, I could tell my coworkers knew something was up. The break room felt quieter. The kind of quiet where everyone's pretending not to eavesdrop. I grabbed my sandwich, nodded at a few people, and overheard the whisper. He's so calm. It's creepy. Another voice whispered. I heard she's pregnant, and he kicked her out. I wanted to turn around and say, correction. She left me for her boss, and I revoked her Hulu, but I figured that might not go over well during an HR audit. Let them talk. I call it mental cybersecurity. Protecting your peace like a firewall protects your data. You can't hack a man who's emotionally encrypted. That evening, my friend Mason called. Dude, he said, your ex's sister just tagged you in a Facebook rant. I rolled my eyes. Oh God, what's the headline? It's a long one, he said, laughing. Something like, heartless fiancé abandons pregnant woman after cheating boss disappears. Bro, the comments section is a war zone. I opened Facebook. Sure enough, there it was, a dramatic post complete with a crying emoji and a blurry photo of Lily looking like a contestant on The Bachelor, Pity Edition. People were commenting things like, men are trash, and prayers for her and the baby. I almost replied, prayers accepted, for my Wi-Fi password she lost. Instead, I just screenshotted it and added it to my collection. Exhibit B. Around 7 p.m., I got another call, this time from an unknown local number. I didn't answer. It went to voicemail. A few minutes later, the notification popped up. I pressed play, and Lily's voice filled the room. Oliver, she began, trying to sound calm, but landing somewhere between desperate and dramatic. I know you're mad, but please, I just need help. I don't have anyone else to call. I paused it halfway through to grab popcorn. When she said, you were always so kind, I muttered, yeah, and you were always so employed. What changed? Then she added, I just need you to remember the man you were when you proposed. I almost laughed out loud. The man I was, I said to my TV, wasn't paying for a boss's baby shower, sweetheart. By 8 p.m., my group chat was lighting up. Mason, my buddy Ryan, and even my cousin were sending screenshots of Lily's family drama spreading online. Bro, she's really running a PR campaign, Ryan texted. You're the villain in her story now. I typed back, good. Every good story needs one. Mason replied with a gif of Thanos snapping his fingers. Accurate. Later that night, I sat outside on my porch, drink in hand, staring at the quiet street. The neighborhood cat strolled across my driveway like it owned the place, which, frankly, it probably did. I took a long sip and said to no one, "You'd think cheating would come with a silence clause." Because here's the thing, people love to rewrite history, especially the ones who set it on fire. They always try to make you the arsonist. And the more you stay calm, the crazier they look. I was counting on that. The next day, my phone rang again. Work number, same tone of doom. "Mr. Bennett?" a voice asked. "This is HR. Do you have a minute?" "Oh, fantastic." My favorite words. Turns out, Lily had emailed my company. Apparently, she was claiming emotional abuse and financial abandonment. The HR rep sounded cautious, like she was handling uranium. "We just want to ensure everything is okay." I smiled through the phone. "Everything's great. My only crime is canceling a joint Netflix account." There was a pause. "Oh," she said, caught off guard. We just needed to check." "Totally understand," I said. "Would you like me to forward screenshots of her texts for context?" "No, that won't be necessary." Call ended. HR knew nonsense when they heard it. I imagine her typing "case closed, dramatic X" in the report. That evening, Mason came over with pizza and a six-pack. "You're handling this too well," he said. "Most guys would have set something on fire by now." I shrugged. "Oh, don't worry. I'm setting things on fire. Just not the legal kind." We clinked bottles, and he said, "You think she's done?" I laughed. "She's only on episode 2 of her redemption arc." Sure enough, right as he left, my phone buzzed again. Another text, another unknown number. "Oliver, please. Just talk to me. Jamie's ghosting me." I don't even know what to do. I typed out a reply, stared at it, then deleted it. The reply said, "You could start by talking to HR. Yours, not mine." Instead, I turned off my phone, leaned back, and let out a deep exhale. There's something oddly satisfying about not replying. It's like resisting the urge to scratch a mosquito bite. Uncomfortable at first, but deeply rewarding when you realize the itch can't control you. I went to bed that night thinking about how I'd spent years trying to be her hero, her support system, her backup plan. And now, I was just a chapter in her cautionary tale. But guess what? I was fine with that. Because while she was playing the victim on Facebook, I was living rent-free in her head, and she wasn't in mine anymore. The next morning, I woke up to one final masterpiece, a group text. I don't know how she did it, but she managed to create a chat that included me, her sister, her mom, and a couple of mutual friends. The message said, "Can we all be adults and talk this out?" I nearly spit out my coffee. Talk this out? Like we were a college project team? No, thank you. I hit leave conversation faster than a cat dodging a bath. Seconds later, Zoe texted me separately. "You're so immature." I smiled and replied, "No, I'm just unavailable for bad management." Then I blocked her. And just like that, my morning was peaceful again. I looked around my apartment, the one I now fully owned emotionally and physically, and realized something. I'd finally reached the point where her chaos was nothing more than background noise. The calls, the messages, the online pity campaign, none of it mattered. Because at the end of the day, when you stop feeding drama, it starves itself. By 5 p.m., I poured myself a drink, sank into my couch, and raised a silent toast to the calm. The calls had stopped. The group texts had failed. Even the internet had moved on. And somewhere out there, Lily was probably learning the hardest lesson of all. That some bridges don't burn because someone set them on fire. They just collapse under the weight of their own lies. 2 days after the group text fiasco, I was in the middle of what normal people call moving on, which for me meant reorganizing my spice rack and pretending that alphabetizing paprika and pepper somehow counted as self-care. The phone buzzed. It was Mason. When a friend calls at 9 a.m. on a Saturday, it's either bad news or a multi-level marketing pitch. "Bro," he said, sounding like a man who'd just discovered buried treasure. "You sitting down?" I dropped the paprika. "I'm in my kitchen, not the stock market." "What's up?" He paused for dramatic effect. "Jamie's married." I blinked. "Come again." "Married. Wife, house in the suburbs, 2 kids, golden retriever. The whole Pinterest board." For a solid 5 seconds I said nothing. Then I laughed. That slow, uncontrollable laugh that starts in your chest and ends in your soul. "You're telling me the man who convinced my fiancée to run off and start a family already had one?" "Yup. Mason said. Apparently, his wife found out about Lily. It's all over the office group chat. HR's having a meltdown. I nearly spilled my coffee. Oh, this is better than Netflix. Let me paint the picture. Jamie, the guy with the no-sock loafers and the leadership guru haircut, had been playing double life bingo. Wife at home, mistress in middle management, baby on the way, and company assets funding both lifestyles. He really thought he was invincible. Newsflash, Karma has a LinkedIn account too. I opened my laptop, because obviously I had to confirm this masterpiece myself. A quick scroll through LinkedIn and boom, Jamie's profile had gone from dynamic team leader passionate about growth to currently seeking new opportunities. Translation, fired. His photo was gone, banner removed, endorsements vanished like witnesses in a mob movie. Corporate witness protection. Mason was still talking, feeding me details like a gossip podcast host. Apparently, his wife showed up at the office yesterday. Full-blown soap opera scene. She found out through his credit card statements. There were hotel charges, baby store purchases, and an Amazon order for prenatal vitamins. I whistled. Damn. Caught by capitalism. Exactly, he said. And get this, she confronted him during the staff meeting. I almost fell out of my chair. In the meeting? Yup. She walked in with the receipts, literally, in a manila folder. Said, if you can explain this, I'll sit down. He couldn't. HR escorted him out 5 minutes later. I leaned back, savoring every syllable. So, Lily left me for a man who left his wife for her, only for him to get left by his wife and his job in the same hour. That's the chain of command, my friend, Mason said. Natural selection. After we hung up, I just sat there in the quiet, grinning at the irony. Life has a wicked sense of humor when you stop interrupting it. I imagined Lily in a cheap motel somewhere, scrolling through her phone, realizing the man she risked everything for couldn't even risk a divorce. Somewhere out there, she was learning that promotion came with no benefits, no dental, and definitely no 401k. By noon, the gossip had made its way to my phone through mutual friends. Bro, you hear about Jamie? Did you know Lily's ex works there too? This is wild. I just replied with the same 2 words every time. Karma delivers. I decided to treat myself. Drove to my favorite diner, ordered a bacon cheeseburger with extra fries, and toasted to poetic justice with a root beer float. The waitress, Sandy, looked at me and said, "You look like a man who just got good news." I smiled. Let's just say, the universe finally clocked in for overtime. She winked. Well, cheers to that, hon. While I ate, I scrolled through my phone again, half expecting another wave of frantic texts from Lily. Sure enough, there it was. A new number. Oliver, please call me. Everything's falling apart. I stared at it, dipped a fry in ketchup, and whispered, "Everything already fell apart, sweetheart. You just showed up late to the collapse." I didn't reply. Some lessons you let life teach for you. By the time I got home, the group chat was exploding again. Ryan had sent screenshots from an anonymous Reddit post. Someone claiming to be an employee at Jamie's company had written a full expose. Our department head got caught cheating with his assistant. Wife found out, HR's in chaos, and the intern from hell is crying in the parking lot. The comments were ruthless. This sounds like an HR nightmare. Girl, get a lawyer. Plot twist. She's pregnant. One commenter wrote, bet the fiancé she left is living his best life. I couldn't resist. I made an account and upvoted it. That evening, Mason came over again with a 6-pack, because apparently our friendship now ran on schadenfreude and beer. So what's the next move? He asked. Move. I said, there is no move. The game's already over. I won without playing. He laughed. You're handling this like a Bond villain. Nah, I said. More like a retired superhero who doesn't come out of retirement unless it's tax deductible. We sat there on the balcony, watching the sunset, trading jokes about Karma's impeccable timing. Mason said, you think she'll try to come back again? I shrugged. Probably. But if she does, she'll find out my heart's under new management. Damn, he said. You rehearsed that line, didn't you? Since the jewelry refund cleared. Later that night, I was brushing my teeth when I heard the faint ping of another message. I glanced at the phone. Another unknown number. I sighed, unlocked it, and read, Jamie won't talk to me. His wife called me a home-wrecking gold digger. I don't know what to do. I wiped my mouth, stared at the screen, and said out loud, you could start by taking accountability. But that's probably not in your skill set. Then I deleted it. Not blocked, deleted. Blocking would have been an acknowledgement. Deleting was indifference. The next day, I woke up feeling like I'd slept through a thunderstorm and woken up in clear weather. It's funny how fast peace returns when you stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. At work, HR was gossip-proofing like crazy, official memos about professional boundaries and office relationships. My boss, Greg, called me into his office. "Hey man," he said, closing the door. "I just wanted to check in. I heard about you know." I smiled. "You mean the corporate soap opera starring my ex and her boss?" He chuckled awkwardly. "Yeah, that. You holding up okay?" "Never better," I said. "Turns out betrayal is great for productivity. I finished 3 reports before 10 a.m. Greg nodded. "Good attitude. For what it's worth, everyone's on your side." "Appreciate it," I said. "Tell them I accept sympathy in the form of paid leave." He laughed. "Get back to work, Bennett." By the end of the day, I had a dozen unread texts, most of them from unknown numbers that I assumed were Lily's new burner phones. The final one made me snort aloud. "I made a mistake leaving you. Jamie ruined everything. I just wish you'd talk to me." I typed a reply just to get it out of my system. "Talk to you about what? The weather? The thunderstorm of your own making." Then I deleted it again. Silence was the only language I wanted to speak. That night, I poured myself a glass of whiskey and scrolled through old photos one last time. Not to reminisce, just to delete. Each swipe was like clearing browser history on a bad life decision. Our vacation in Miami? Gone. Her birthday dinner? Gone. The selfie we took outside the jewelry store? Double gone. By the end, my gallery looked like a man who'd never heard of Lily in his life. That's when I realized I didn't hate her. Hate takes energy. I was just done. Emotionally logged out. Sometime around midnight, Mason texted me again. "Just saw a post. Jamie's wife filed for divorce and is suing him for misuse of company funds." I grinned. "So the sequel's better than the original." "Dude," he said, "you need to write a book about this." "Already living it," I replied. Working title: The Promotion She Didn't Deserve. Before bed, I stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere across town, Lily was probably crying in a motel room, realizing her boss wasn't her happily ever after, but her exit interview from Common Sense. And for the first time since that infamous phone call, I felt completely free. Not angry, not bitter, just untethered. It's weird, the moment you stop wanting closure. You realize it's not something they give you. It's something you give yourself when you stop replaying the scene. She'd made her choices, and life was cashing those checks with interest. I finished my drink, raised the glass to the window, and said softly, "To Jamie's wife, may her lawyer be ruthless." Then I laughed, turned off the lights, and went to bed. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight streaming through the blinds, the smell of fresh coffee, and the distinct feeling that the worst part of my life had quietly packed up and moved out. My phone buzzed one more time, a final text from Lily. "I just wish things could go back to how they were." I stared at it, smiled, and typed one last message before deleting her number for good. They did, for me. A week after the whole Jamie's married revelation, I was back to what I now called post-chaos normal. My mornings were quiet again. My coffee maker didn't sound like it was competing with someone's hairdryer, and my living room didn't smell like Sephora exploded. Life was finally stable, which, of course, meant the universe was about to test that. It happened on a Tuesday, because bad news never respects weekends. I got to work early, ready to impress my boss by existing, when I saw a plain white envelope sitting on my desk. No postage, just my name written in handwriting that looked like cursive met caffeine withdrawal. I flipped it over, and there it was, certified mail. Now, I don't know if you've ever received a certified letter at work, but it's basically the adult version of "we need to talk." Nothing good ever comes in one. Either you're being sued, audited, or, in my case, haunted by your ex with access to a post office. I tore it open, expecting divorce papers I didn't need, or maybe a bill for emotional damages. Instead, it was 3 handwritten pages, soap opera penmanship, hearts over the I's, dramatic loops on the Y's. I didn't even need to read the signature. I could smell the regret through the ink. "Oliver," it began, "I never meant for things to happen this way. You abandoned me in my time of need." That line almost made me spit out my coffee. I abandoned her. "Ma'am, You moved out with a duffel bag and a boss who already had a wife. I kept reading because sometimes stupidity deserves an audience. Please pay for my hotel until I get back on my feet. We should go to couples therapy to heal this betrayal. This betrayal. Not her betrayal, mine. I had to reread that part just to make sure my brain wasn't experiencing lag. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or frame the letter as a piece of performance art. It was like reading a script written by someone who'd slept through reality. I walked straight to the break room where my friend Ryan, our office's resident lawyer/sarcasm supplier, was pouring coffee. I slid the letter toward him like it was evidence in a criminal trial. "Read this," I said. He started reading. His face changed expressions faster than a malfunctioning emoji keyboard. By paragraph 2, he was wheezing. "Oh my God," he said between laughs. "If I die laughing, you can sue her for emotional distress." "Is this not insanity?" I asked. Ryan held up a hand, still chuckling. "This is gold, man. You don't respond to this, you archive it. One day Netflix will call, and you'll need this for the writer's room." We kept the letter. I folded it neatly, put it in a folder labeled Evidence for the Biopic, and slipped it into my desk drawer. Because honestly, who knows? Maybe one day I'll sell the movie rights. The promotion she didn't expect, based on poor life choices. The rest of the day went by uneventfully, except for the fact that I couldn't stop thinking about how someone could twist reality so hard it snapped. I mean, she really believed I owed her something. As if heartbreak came with alimony. Around 6 p.m., I got home, dropped my keys on the counter, and saw another letter slipped under my door. Not certified this time, but the handwriting was the same. "Round 2. I muttered, tearing it open. "Oliver," it began again. Apparently, introspection wasn't her strong suit. "I forgive you for how you treated me." Forgive me. This woman had the nerve to turn my peace into a confessional. "I know you acted out of pain. I still believe we're meant to be. God has a plan for us." I stared at the paper. God might have a plan, but I was pretty sure it didn't involve me Venmoing her hotel bill. Halfway through, she mentioned how lonely she was and how this baby deserves a father figure with integrity. That one almost made me snort my drink. Integrity? Lady, you cheated with your married boss. I'm not the integrity fairy. I took a photo of the letter and sent it to Ryan and Mason with one caption: "The sequel no one asked for." Mason replied, "Tell her to send it by FedEx next time so it feels more official." Ryan sent back, "Frame it. Title it, Certified Delusion." By the next day, it wasn't just letters. It was voicemails. Long ones. Emotional ones. Some started with crying, some ended with accusations. One of them went, "Oliver, I saw your car at the diner. Were you with someone?" I was a cheeseburger, but I didn't think that counted as infidelity. She left 7 messages in 2 days, each progressively more dramatic than the last. I started rating them like podcasts. Episode 1, The Lonely Hotel. 3 stars, solid emotional delivery, lacks self-awareness. Episode 2, The Father of Integrity. 2 stars, repetitive plot. Episode 3, The Universe is Testing Me. 1 star, weak ending, too much crying. By the time episode 7 dropped, I was considering charging a subscription fee. At lunch on Thursday, Ryan and I were at our favorite spot downtown, the kind of place that serves burgers big enough to solve emotional problems. I told him about the voicemails, and he shook his head. "You know what this is?" he said. "Classic deflection. She's rewriting the narrative because she can't handle being the villain." "Then she should have picked a different genre," I said. "I'm not signing up for a redemption arc." He laughed. "Man, you should start a podcast, Letters from My Ex, a cautionary tale. Season 1 sponsored by Common Sense," I said, which she clearly ran out of. When I got home that night, there was a 3rd letter waiting. No envelope this time, just folded and tucked into my mailbox like a teenage breakup note. I opened it, bracing myself. "Oliver, I saw your friend Mason's post. Are you mocking me online?" I laughed so hard I almost dropped it. Mason had posted a meme earlier that said, "When your ex leaves you for her boss, but ends up jobless and homeless." That's not heartbreak, that's a plot twist. I guess subtlety wasn't our strong suit. The letter went on for 2 pages about public humiliation and privacy violations. Then it ended with, "If you have any decency left, help me get through this pregnancy." I folded it neatly and muttered, "I have decency, just not amnesia." The next morning, I stopped by the post office on my way to work. The clerk looked bored, probably thinking I was mailing bills or tax forms. Nope. I handed him a plain envelope addressed to Lily's motel. Inside, one note, return to sender. Sincerely, Common Sense. For the rest of the week, I didn't hear from her. It was weird, like the calm after a hurricane, where you're not sure if it's really over or if the storm's just reloading. But on Saturday morning, another certified letter showed up. Apparently, she'd found a bulk discount on emotional postage. This one was shorter and even more dramatic. I'm leaving town, she wrote. You'll never hear from me again. You win. I smiled, sipped my coffee, and whispered, finally, a victory speech. But of course, the last line killed the vibe. Unless you want to talk before I go. Of course she had to add that. Drama never exits quietly. It always leaves the door cracked open. I didn't respond. Didn't call. Didn't text. I just went about my weekend like a man who'd passed a difficult exam. I even went grocery shopping, something I'd avoided because that store was full of Lily's ghosts. But this time, it was different. No sadness. No nostalgia. Just me, buying steak, beer, and freedom. Sunday afternoon, Mason and Ryan came over to watch the game. Mason spotted the stack of letters on my counter and said, "Damn, bro, she's building a paper trail." Yeah, I said, a trail straight to irrelevance. Ryan picked one up, reading aloud dramatically. "We should go to therapy to heal this betrayal," he laughed. Man, if this were a movie, the audience would boo her. Exactly, I said. This isn't therapy. It's public relations. Mason cracked open a beer. So, what are you going to do with all of them? Keep them, I said. Proof that I survived the human equivalent of a pop-up ad. They both laughed, and for a moment, the air in my apartment felt lighter than it had in months. I realized that while she was writing chapters of regret, I was writing a new story, one with peace, beer, and people who actually understood boundaries. When they left that night, I stood by my window, watching the streetlights flicker against the quiet neighborhood. Somewhere out there, Lily was still writing letters, still spinning her version of events. But it didn't matter, because I wasn't her audience anymore. I raised my glass one last time and said softly, "Certified received, drama returned to sender." And with that, I finally, officially, closed the chapter. Wednesday evening began innocently enough. I'd just finished microwaving leftover Chinese food that had definitely seen better days and was halfway through an episode of Better Call Saul when my doorbell rang. At first, I assumed it was a delivery. Maybe Mason had finally ordered that dumb, "congratulations on your emotional maturity" cake he'd been threatening to send me. But when I glanced at the doorbell camera, the universe rewarded me with an encore performance from my favorite recurring sitcom characters, Lily's parents, Martin and Elaine, aka the ghosts of poor decisions past. I froze, chopsticks midair. They looked exactly how I remembered. Martin in his ever-present golf sweater even though it was 75 degrees, and Elaine wearing pearls big enough to pick up satellite signals. The two of them stood on my porch like Jehovah's Witnesses for guilt. I muttered, "Oh God, they've come to reclaim the warranty on their defective daughter." I opened the door a cautious 3 inches, enough to establish dominance, but not enough for them to wedge in emotionally. Martin smiled that awkward, trying to be reasonable smile. "Oliver, can we come in for a moment?" I gave him the look of a man evaluating whether forgiveness was tax-deductible. "Depends. Is this a social call or an intervention?" Elaine answered for him, voice trembling like she'd practiced this monologue in the car. "Oliver, she's pregnant. She's scared. She has nowhere to go." I sighed theatrically. "Elaine, she's pregnant and employed. Scared, maybe. Homeless, no? That's a personal budget issue." Martin stepped forward, hands raised like a hostage negotiator. "Son, we're not here to start a fight. We just think you could show a little compassion." "Compassion?" I repeated, leaning on the doorframe. "Martin, your daughter left me for her married boss and now wants me to fund her maternity leave. Compassion's in short supply this fiscal year." Elaine gasped like I'd just kicked a puppy. "How dare you speak about the mother of your unborn child like that?" I blinked. "Whoa, let's stop right there, Broadway. That's not my unborn child. That's Jamie's unpaid internship." Her eyes went wide, and I swear if indignation were a sport, she'd have broken a record. "You men are all the same," she hissed. "Ma'am," I said calmly, "please don't lump me in with your son-in-law's boss's boyfriend. I'm just trying to watch Netflix." Martin sighed. "Look, Oliver, we know mistakes were made. Plural. Yes, I interrupted. And one of them still wearing waterproof mascara somewhere in a motel. Elaine stomped her heel. You think this is funny? Honestly, I said, scratching my chin. A little. Tragic comedy, really. Somewhere between Maury and Shark Tank. She turned to her husband, whispering, he's heartless. Martin, to his credit, still tried diplomacy. Oliver, maybe you two could talk it out. You had something good once. Martin, the only thing we had in common was a Wi-Fi plan and matching toothbrushes, both of which are canceled. Elaine crossed her arms. You'll regret this coldness one day. I smiled politely. Not as much as Lily regrets leaving me for a guy with a LinkedIn bio that starts with visionary. 30 minutes. That's how long they stayed. 30 full minutes of emotional spam. Pleading, scolding, guilt-tripping, looping back around to pleading again. I swear Elaine changed tactics like a telemarketer on commission. At one point, she even tried religion. What would Jesus do? She demanded. Probably not co-sign an Audi for adultery, I said. That one earned me a gasp loud enough to set off nearby car alarms. Martin tugged her arm. Let's go, honey. He's not ready. Translation, he's not buying what we're selling. When they finally retreated down the porch steps, I leaned against the doorway and raised my glass of water in salute. Cheers to boundaries, I said to the security camera. The camera blinked back, silently judging me, but I felt like I'd just defended the Alamo of personal peace. I went back inside, sat down, and realized my Chinese food was cold. Didn't even matter. The satisfaction was a meal in itself. About 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Text from Mason. Dude, saw a Facebook post from Lily's mom. You've officially been promoted to devil incarnate. I opened the link. Sure enough, Elaine had written a post that read like a Lifetime movie synopsis. My daughter's ex has turned his back on her in her time of need. Pregnant, abandoned, yet still strong. The comments section was pure chaos. Men these days have no hearts. Prayers for Lily. Stay strong, mama. I almost replied with, stay strong, just not in my living room. Instead, I screenshotted it for my growing digital scrapbook of delusion. Thursday morning at work, Ryan slid a coffee across my desk. Heard the in-laws made landfall. Yup, I said. They tried diplomacy. I countered with sarcasm. Successful mission? Complete. No casualties except maybe their faith in humanity. He laughed. You realize you're in the eye of a drama hurricane, right? Yeah, I said, sipping the coffee. But I built my house out of indifference. By noon, my phone started buzzing again. Not Lily this time, but mutual friends. Apparently, the parental pity tour had gone mobile. Elaine was calling anyone who'd ever liked one of our engagement photos. She's telling people you locked a pregnant woman out of your house, Ryan said, scrolling through his phone. I shrugged. Technically true. I locked a pregnant cheater out of my house. Context matters. He smirked. You ever think about going public? Set the record straight. No need, I said. The truth's like daylight. It shows up eventually. That night, though, I couldn't help imagining the dinner conversation at Casa Thompson. Elaine stirring her soup with righteous fury, Martin nodding like a hostage, Lily dabbing fake tears while scrolling through baby name apps for sympathy clicks. I could practically hear it. Mom, he won't even answer my calls. Sweetheart, men are weak. Dad, say something. Martin, pass the salt. The visual made me chuckle mid-beer. Friday evening, I came home from work to find a small box on my porch. No return address. For a moment, I thought, please tell me she didn't send me a baby announcement already. I opened it cautiously. Inside was a framed photo of Lily and me at our engagement shoot, smiling like two idiots who believed in happily ever after. The note taped to the back read, "Don't forget what you had." I stared at it for a good 10 seconds before tossing it straight into the recycling bin. Already recycled, I said out loud. An hour later, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a voicemail from Martin. Oliver, I just want to say, Elaine's a little emotional. We just want peace. Maybe when the baby's born, you'll feel differently. I hit replay just to make sure I'd heard that right. When the baby's born, you'll feel differently. That was rich. The only thing I'd feel differently about when that baby arrived was gratitude that diapers weren't my financial problem. Saturday morning, I decided to drive out to the farmer's market, cleanse the aura, buy overpriced honey, pretend I was thriving. While browsing tomatoes, I ran into someone who'd gone to church with Elaine. She gave me the pity look. We're all praying for Lily, she said gently. She's been through so much. I smiled. Me too, I said. Every night I pray she learns about accountability before her next relationship. The woman blinked, unsure whether I was serious, and walked away muttering something about bitterness. By Sunday, the phone calls finally stopped. Maybe they'd run out of emotional gas. Or maybe Martin had realized the futility of reasoning with a man who answered guilt trips with punchlines. I spent the afternoon cleaning, blasting music, and feeling a strange mix of peace and absurd amusement. That's when I saw it. One last text. From Elaine, of course. I hope you can live with yourself. I typed back. Oh, I sleep great. Thanks for checking. Then I hit send, blocked her number, and felt like I'd just deleted malware from my life. That evening, Mason swung by with 2 beers and his usual smirk. So the in-laws paid a visit, huh? Yep. Full parade. Trumpets, banners, emotional guilt confetti. How'd you handle it? Like a pro, I said. Polite tone, clear boundaries, light sarcasm. He grinned. That's your holy trinity. We clinked bottles, watched the game, and by halftime I realized something profound. The less I engaged with their drama, the smaller it got. Their narrative only thrived when I fed it energy, and I was officially on an emotional diet. Later, after Mason left, I stood by my window again, my unofficial therapy spot, and thought about how weirdly freeing it felt to say no. People act like refusing chaos makes you cruel, but honestly, it's the kindest thing you can do for yourself. Somewhere out there, Lily's parents were probably still rehearsing their speeches, blaming me for everything from climate change to their daughter's poor judgment. Let them. I'd learned something better than revenge. Apathy with a good night's sleep. Before heading to bed, I poured a final drink, raised it toward the doorbell camera, and toasted quietly. To Martin and Elaine. May their next son-in-law come with a return policy. Then I took a sip, turned off the lights, and laughed softly to myself. Because that was the real victory. Not the silence, not the block numbers, not even the peace. The real victory was knowing I didn't need to explain my side anymore. The truth had already packed its bags and was marching proudly behind them in their little parade. Thursday morning dawned with that weird, glassy kind of sunlight that makes everything look cleaner than it is, like the world got power washed overnight by a very efficient angel with a hose. I woke up before my alarm, which either meant I was finally healing or my brain had decided sleep was for people who hadn't recently audited their relationships. Coffee, shower, fresh t-shirt, gym bag, boom. I was out the door with the confident stride of a man who'd changed all the passwords and slept like it. My gym isn't fancy, which is exactly why I love it. No eucalyptus towels, no influencer ring lights, no guy named Skylar selling powdered moon dust at the counter. Just iron, rubber, loud music, carpet that's seen things, and a front desk guy named Pete who looks like he could bench press a Ford Focus and then apologize for being in the way. I scanned in, shared the universal nod with the morning regulars, and headed to the rack for squats because nothing says therapy like putting your problems on a bar and standing up with them until your thighs file a complaint with HR. I had just finished my second set when I felt it. The change in air pressure that warns you a storm is building behind you. I re-racked the bar, turned, and there she was by the treadmills like a plot twist in overpriced leggings. Lily, belly visible, ponytail too tight, eyes already shining with that watery film people use when they're about to ask for what they're not owed. The playlist switched songs right then, as if a DJ in heaven selected drama, extended mix. She approached like a diplomat crossing a demilitarized zone. Oliver, just listen to me for 5 minutes, she said, breath hitching, volume calibrated to draw sympathy from distant cardio machines. I glanced at the clock above the mirrors, nodded once, and said, "You've got 3. Timer's running." A couple of dudes doing curls pretended not to eavesdrop with the focus of undercover agents. "I made a mistake," she said. "Jamie lied. He's married. He's a coward. He ghosted me. And I'm—" She gestured at her belly as if I might have missed the headline. "I'm trying to fix my life." "I believe you," I said and meant it. "I just don't believe on the fix." "You're cruel," she whispered, like an actress testing the microphone. "You changed the locks. You canceled everything. I felt like I didn't exist." "You do exist," I said, "just not on my accounts." She flinched like the truth had sharp corners. "We shared a life. We shared a lease and a playlist," I said. "The life part requires honesty." Her jaw set. So that's it. You're just going to lift weights and pretend none of this matters. Not pretending, I said, grabbing my water bottle. I processed. Now I'm squatting. She blinked at that, thrown off by the normalcy of it, like she expected violins, not chalk dust. I'm scared, she said. I don't have anywhere stable. My parents are unbearable. Jamie's wife threatened a restraining order if I text again. I keep waking up at 3 a.m. thinking I can't breathe. There it was. The tiny human truth under all the mess. For a moment, compassion flickered like a dashboard light. I wasn't made of stone. I was just done being used for heat. I lowered my voice. I believe you're scared. I also believe you put yourself in the passenger seat of a car with no brakes, because the driver promised great views. Her eyes watered. I loved you. If that was love, I said gently, then love needs a better training program. She studied my face for a long second, maybe searching for the boy who used to bring her coffee and fix her LinkedIn typos. What happened to the guy who would have done anything for me? He learned the word no, I said. Turns out it's a full sentence. Pete wandered by, offered a cautious, everything okay here, like a bouncer at a poetry slam. I nodded. Lily sniffed, waved him away. We're fine, she said, and Pete hovered just long enough to make it clear he'd be nearby if fine changed its mind. Can you at least help me for a little while? She asked. Just until I'm stable. Pay the motel for 2 weeks. I'll figure the rest out. I wiped my hands on a towel and made myself say it plain, with no cleverness to hide behind. No, Lily. I'm not your emergency fund. I'm not your backup husband. I'm not the guy you come back to when the music stops. She inhaled sharply. I never thought you could be this cold. I'm not cold, I said. I'm done being warm to people who set fires. A trainer across the room yelled, "Drive through your heels," at a client, and the phrase echoed inside me. Heels. Yes. I rooted mine to the rubber floor. You need to talk to HR, I added. Yours, not mine. Talk to a lawyer. Make a plan. Get receipts. And stop turning your consequences into my responsibilities. Her lip trembled. I wanted a family. And I wanted a partner, I said. We both made wishes. Only one of us stole the coins. She stared at me with an anger that felt like grief wearing armor. So that's it. You're going to watch me suffer. I'm going to watch you grow, I said. Suffering is the part you can't skip. She laughed once, small and bitter. You're different. I'm honest, I said, which probably feels different. We stood in that fluorescent stalemate while the room breathed around us. Plates clanking, ropes slapping, fans humming their industrial lullaby. She finally said, I can't go to another gym. This one's close to my doctor. I'm not banning you from fitness, I said. I'm asking you to respect my peace. So you'll ignore me? She said. I will outwork the urge to respond, I said. It's a muscle. I'm training it. Something in her posture sagged, the fight draining like air from a tire. Do you ever think about the baby? She asked, quiet, almost childlike. Every time I choose mercy over revenge, I said. I don't drag your name online. I don't tell my mother the worst stories. I don't send those screenshots to your aunt. That's me thinking about the baby, keeping the world a fraction softer than I want to. She looked startled at that, like she hadn't considered restraint as a gift. Then help me, she said, one last Hail Mary. Please. I am helping, I said. I'm telling you the truth to your face. She wiped her cheeks, annoyed with her own tears. You sound like a therapist. Can't afford one, I said. Spent my refund on dumbbells. That almost made her smile, and for a second the past wobbled into focus. Movie nights, chilly Sundays, the way she used to tuck her feet under my thigh when she was cold. I let the image come and go like a stretch I wasn't keeping. Okay, she said finally, voice scraped thin. I get it. You won't help. I won't rescue, I said. Different verb. She nodded, a stiff little motion of surrender, and turned toward the treadmills like a soldier dismissed. Halfway there, she pivoted back. One more thing, she said. Why are you so calm? Because I rehearsed this scene in my head 100 times, I said. And in every version, I picked me. She held my gaze, then gave the barest nod and walked away. I watched her step onto a treadmill, press buttons with the jittery decisiveness of someone trying to outrun a feeling, and I went back to the rack. The bar felt heavier, of course it did. Clarity always weighs more than hope. I chalked my hands, ducked under, lifted, and thought about form. On the fourth set, Pete drifted close again. You good, man? He asked softly. I'm better than I used to be, I said. Which is the whole point of this place, right? He grinned. Progress over ego, he said, patting the rack. Let me know if you need a spot. Between sets, I watched the room the way you do when your heart has calmed down enough to see other people again. A woman deadlifting her body weight like she'd made an appointment with gravity and refused to be late. An older guy on the rower, keeping time with quiet dignity. Two teens laughing too loud and learning what their bones were built for. Life, stubborn and sweaty, going on. I moved to pull-ups, then farmer's carries, letting the work rinse whatever residue the conversation left behind. By the time I hit the sled, breath coming in organized fires, I felt like a person with edges again. Lily had shifted to a slow incline walk, eyes on some far point only she could see. Good. Let her stare at the horizon. Everybody needs one. That was enough. 3 months after the gym showdown of the century, life had finally gone quiet enough that I could hear my own thoughts again, and they sounded suspiciously like smooth jazz. No surprise visits, no handwritten manifestos, no late-night voicemails demanding closure. Just me, my coffee, and an ever-expanding playlist called Songs for People Who Dodged a Bullet. Things were good. So, naturally, that's when karma decided to drop by wearing heels and holding receipts. It started with a text from Mason. Bro, you sitting down? I replied, it's 9 a.m. on a Saturday. Define sitting. He sent a screenshot of a social media post from a coworker at Lily's old company. Apparently, Jamie's wife kicked him out, and HR is launching an investigation. Below it, a blurry picture of Jamie hauling cardboard boxes to a Camry that looked as tired as his soul. Caption, corporate scandal hits our office again, #leadership goals. I laughed so hard I almost spilled my coffee. Almost. See, karma doesn't send you an email first. It just quietly sits in the corner, waiting for the right dramatic lighting. And when it shows up deluxe edition. Jamie's wife had apparently gone full detective mode, found out about the affair and the company funds he used for business dinners, and decided her next move was divorce plus public humiliation. According to Mason, she'd even changed the locks and spray-painted Team Wife on the garage door. Subtle? No. Satisfying? Absolutely. Meanwhile, Lily's world was collapsing faster than a cheap lawn chair. She'd lost the apartment Jamie had been paying for, the Audi got repossessed, because of course it did, and she moved back in with her parents. Remember Elaine and Martin, the self-appointed moral police? Yeah. Apparently they weren't thrilled about their daughter turning their guest room into a maternity ward/pity party. She'd posted a new profile picture anyway, her hand on her baby bump, captioned, "Strong women rise from ashes." Except the ashes were unpaid bills. By lunchtime, I was neck-deep in the group chat with Mason and Ryan, giving play-by-play commentary like it was the Super Bowl of regret. Mason, dude, she sold the Audi sound system on Marketplace for $150. Ryan, she's posting cryptic quotes like, people change when you stop funding their Netflix. Me, poetic, tragic, budget-friendly. Of course, I told myself I was above it all, that I didn't care, but come on. If Karma were a TV show, you'd watch every episode. I made popcorn. Around 6 p.m. that night, Mason called, voice still shaking with secondhand amusement. Bro, Jamie just posted on LinkedIn. He wrote an entire article about resilience through adversity. I spit my drink. You mean he cheated, lost his job, and turned it into a motivational post? Mason read it out loud. Sometimes life challenges you to grow beyond your comfort zone. I'm grateful for the lessons pain teaches. I groaned. So he's basically rebranding as the Dalai Lama of bad decisions. Mason snorted. His wife commented, glad you're learning something. 10,000 likes. That night, I sat on my balcony with a beer, watching the city lights blink like the universe was in on the joke. It hit me that I didn't even feel vengeful anymore, just weirdly grateful. You spend months thinking you'll never get justice, and then one day you realize justice has a great sense of timing. 2 weeks later, I ran into Zoe, Lily's sister, at a coffee shop. I was mid-order when I heard the icy voice behind me. Wow, guess karma has favorites. I turned, smiled. Zoe, hey, still doing that Defend the Indefensible tour? She rolled her eyes. You're so smug. Not smug, I said. Just well-rested. She snapped. She's been through hell. She doesn't deserve this. I took my coffee from the barista, leaned on the counter, and said, "Deserve is a big word. Maybe save it for people who don't steal company cars for team-building activities." Zoe scoffed. "You think you're better than her." "No," I said. "I just think I'm better off." Then I smiled politely and walked out, leaving her to argue with the foam on her latte. That conversation stuck with me longer than it should have. On the drive home, I kept thinking about how people like Zoe and Elaine needed a villain to explain why their fairy tale burned down. I was their bad guy, and honestly, fine. If being the villain in someone else's story keeps you out of their sequel, it's a promotion. Weeks rolled by, and rumors about Jamie and Lily kept surfacing like bad sequels. Someone said Jamie moved back in with his parents to reflect. Someone else said Lily was considering a tell-all podcast. I had one reaction to both. Please don't make me a guest. But the real news arrived one afternoon when Ryan burst into my office like he'd won the lottery. "Bro, you are not ready. Jamie filed for limited child support." I blinked. "What's limited child support?" "Like child support on layaway." Ryan grinned. "He's claiming financial hardship. He says he can't afford to support the baby because he needs to rebuild his career. Guy made 6 figures last year." I laughed so loud my boss peeked in to ask if I was okay. "Never better," I said, just watching Karma finish her rounds. The next Saturday, I hit the gym again. Pete was at the front desk, nodded knowingly. "Bro, you see that news about that corporate guy who got caught cheating?" "Hard to miss," I said. He laughed. "People never learn. You don't mix business with pleasure unless you own the business and the pleasure signs an NDA." I nearly spit out my pre-workout. Later that night, I was scrolling my feed and saw a photo of Lily, 8 months pregnant, standing in her parents' driveway, holding a baby shower cupcake. The caption, "Sometimes the strongest thing a woman can do is start over." The comments were all variations of "You got this," and "God gives his toughest battles to his strongest soldiers." And right underneath, Elaine had commented, "He will regret losing you forever." I tapped the heart icon out of pure sarcastic support. Then I logged off. I didn't need to win that argument anymore. That's the thing about karma. It doesn't always hit like a Hollywood explosion. Sometimes it's a slow burn that cooks exactly the right people at the right temperature. 3 months ago, I was the punchline of someone else's story. Now, I was just a guy sleeping 8 hours a night and eating vegetables voluntarily. Progress. One evening, I was sitting on my balcony again, because apparently that's where I have all my epiphanies, watching a summer thunderstorm roll in. Lightning flashed across the sky, and for a moment, it looked like someone was taking pictures of me from heaven. I thought about the old days, her laughter, the plans, the version of me that thought stability came from other people. Turns out stability's a DIY project. You build it yourself, one boundary at a time. Then came the final confirmation that the universe had a sense of humor. A letter arrived in my mailbox, not from Lily this time, but from a collections agency. Apparently, I'd been removed from the Audi lease months ago, but they still wanted a statement of release. I called the agent. "Sir, we just need to confirm that the vehicle was repossessed." "Oh, it was," I said cheerfully, metaphorically and literally. The guy paused. "Excuse me." "Never mind," I said. "Long story. Great ending." When I hung up, I laughed until I cried. Sometimes you don't plan a punchline. Life just delivers one via certified mail. That night, Ryan came over with pizza and said, "You realize you're basically a folk hero at this point? Half the office uses pull an Oliver to mean cut off toxic people with style." I pretended to bow. "My legacy is secure." He grinned. "Seriously though, man, you handled this whole thing like a pro." "Not a pro," I said. "Just a guy who finally read the terms and conditions of his own piece." After he left, I cleaned up, stood in the quiet kitchen, and realized the story was ending itself. No grand revenge, no dramatic showdown with Jamie in a parking lot, no bitterness left to chew. Just me, calm, content, and ready for whatever came next. And maybe that's what karma really is. Not some cosmic hit and run, but a slow, patient accountant balancing the books. One day, you wake up and realize the universe closed the case months ago. I looked around my apartment, my place, my rules, my silence. And for the first time in forever, I felt something like relief. It wasn't revenge. It was closure with interest. And it tasted a lot like peace. It was one of those soft, indecisive afternoons where the sky can't decide if it's depressed or just lazy. I was sitting at the cafe across from my apartment, Same corner table, same chipped mug, same overpriced coffee that tasted like closure with a hint of burnt optimism when I saw her. 3 months since the repossession, 5 since the infamous phone call, and there she was on the other side of the street, belly round, hair a little duller, eyes fixed on a grocery bag that looked heavier than her dignity. For a second, instinct almost made me stand up. Almost. But then I remembered her voice. Clear as day. I'm moving in with my boss, Jamie. We're having a baby together. And I stayed put, stirring my coffee like I was conducting an orchestra of restraint. She didn't see me. Or maybe she did and pretended not to. Either way, she was wobbling under those bags like the universe had decided to give her a workout plan called Consequences, full body edition. I watched her drop one bag, bend to grab it, and the corner of a cereal box peeked out, some off-brand flakes that screamed budget life. My heart didn't ache, it shrugged. I took a slow sip and whispered, "Still congratulations," like it was a prayer for my own sanity. The barista, a college kid who always looked one assignment away from a breakdown, raised an eyebrow. "You say something?" "Just blessing the coffee," I said. He nodded like that made perfect sense in this economy. After she disappeared around the corner, I checked my phone. Nothing urgent. No new crises, no passive-aggressive messages, no relatives performing sympathy theater online. Just peace. It's wild how silence, once terrifying, becomes addictive when you realize it means nobody's lying to you that day. Later that week, the silence broke, but only slightly. I was at home, scrolling through the never-ending chaos of social media, when a message popped up from an unknown number. "Hey, this is Zoe." "Great." The ambassador of misplaced loyalty. The text continued. "Lily had the baby. It's a boy. She's naming him Miles. She thought you should know." I stared at the screen for a long moment, thumb hovering over reply, brain doing that thing where it pretends indecision is deep thought. Eventually I typed, "Tell her congratulations." Hit send. End of transmission. 30 seconds later came the inevitable follow-up. "She could use some help with baby expenses." I actually laughed out loud, the kind of laugh that starts as disbelief and ends as cardio. I typed back, "Sure, ask Jamie's HR department." Then I muted the conversation. A few minutes later, Mason texted me a screenshot of Zoe's Facebook post. A baby photo wrapped in a hospital blanket with a caption that read, "Welcome, little miracle. Some people walk away, but angels stay." Mason added, "You should probably frame this for the Hall of Audacity." I sent back a thumbs-up emoji and poured myself a beer. The truth is, I didn't even feel angry. Just detached. Like watching a rerun of a show you used to love before realizing every plot twist was lazy. I scrolled through the comments. Elaine had written, "Proud Nana. God restores what the devil steals." And Martin had dropped a single heart emoji like an absentee landlord of emotions. I didn't comment, obviously, but I did think, yeah, God restores, just not your daughter's credit score. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, sunlight sneaking through the blinds. It was one of those rare mornings where you feel like the world's giving you a soft restart. I made pancakes, real ones this time, not the protein kind I used to choke down when I thought I was being disciplined. Halfway through flipping the last one, my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize, but something told me to pick up. "Oliver," a tired voice said. It was her. "Lily." I could hear hospital machines beeping faintly in the background, the murmur of nurses. She sounded smaller somehow. "Hey," I said evenly, setting the spatula down. "I just wanted to tell you, he's healthy. Miles. 7 pounds, 6 ounces. I know you probably don't care, but..." "I care," I interrupted softly. "Just not in the way you want." She went quiet. Then, "I don't know why I called. I guess I just wanted to hear your voice." "That's nostalgia," I said. "It tricks you into thinking you missed the person when you actually just missed the piece before they broke it." She sniffled. "You always have a quote ready, don't you?" "Comes with surviving you," I said. A faint laugh escaped her, genuine but tired. "You hate me." "No," I said. "I outgrew you." We sat in silence for a few seconds, the kind that stretches like taffy. Then she said, "Jamie's not around. He said he needs to rebuild." "Whatever that means." "It means you should stop expecting rescue missions," I said. "I know," she whispered. Sometimes I wish things were simple again." "Simple," I repeated, almost smiling. "Simple was before you confused ambition with affection." That one landed. I heard it in her breathing. She finally said, You really won't ever forgive me, will you? I already did, I said. That's why I'm not angry anymore. The line stayed quiet long enough that I thought she'd hung up. Then she said, barely audible, "Congratulations, Oliver. You got your piece." Click. Call ended. I stood there for a while, spatula still in hand, letting the weight of that irony settle. Congratulations. The same word I'd thrown at her like a paper airplane months ago. It circled back, this time without venom, and landed exactly where it belonged. The next few days passed in a blur of ordinary bliss. Work, gym, dinners with Mason and Ryan, evenings spent reading instead of doom scrolling. You know life's improving when your biggest problem is running out of clean socks instead of patience. One evening, I was walking home from the office when I passed a small park near the hospital. A woman was sitting on a bench, rocking a baby stroller, humming softly. For a second I thought, no, couldn't be. Then she looked up. Lily. I froze mid-step, but she smiled faintly, like seeing a ghost she'd once known well. I nodded. She gestured at the stroller. Miles, she said quietly. He likes trees. They calm him. Smart kid, I said. We stood there for an awkward minute, two ex-lovers politely sharing oxygen. Then she said, I'm sorry. For everything. I nodded again, because forgiveness doesn't need a speech, just an understanding that the chapter's closed. You look happy, she added. I am, I said. Turns out peace is cheaper than therapy. She smiled at that, tired but real. Then she looked down at her son. He'll never know what happened between us, she said. Good, I said. Let him write his own story. She nodded. Take care, Oliver. You too, Lily. And just like that, the universe performed its final magic trick, closure disguised as small talk in a public park. I walked away lighter than I'd felt in years. A few weeks later, life did what it always does. It kept going. I met someone new, actually. Her name's Clara. She's an architect, brilliant with sarcasm, allergic to drama, and the kind of woman who reads contracts before signing them. Our first date was simple, burgers, fries, easy laughter, but it felt honest. I told her about my last relationship in broad strokes. No bitterness, just facts. She smiled and said, so basically, you survived a reality show. Exactly, I said. And now I'm retired. 3 months into dating, I realized something crazy. I didn't check my phone anxiously anymore. I didn't rehearse arguments in the shower. I didn't crave revenge. I just lived. Clara and I built something quiet and steady, the kind of relationship you don't have to explain in group chats. One night, we were sitting on my balcony, my sacred spot, sharing a bottle of wine. She leaned her head on my shoulder and said, You ever think about the people who hurt you? Sometimes, I said, but not to miss them, just to remember how far I've come. She nodded. Then cheers to distance. We clinked glasses, and I swear the city lights winked in agreement. Weeks turned into months, and I hardly thought about Lily anymore. Occasionally, I'd hear updates through the grapevine. She moved out of her parents' house, started freelancing online, maybe found therapy that didn't involve my wallet. Good for her. Everyone deserves a reboot, even the ones who crashed your system first. Then one afternoon, an email hit my inbox from an address I didn't recognize. Subject line, thank you. I hovered over delete, but curiosity won. It was from Lily. One line only. I meant what I said at the park. You got your piece. I'm still earning mine. Take care. No drama. No attachments. Just punctuation. I smiled, closed the laptop, and whispered again, still congratulations. And for the first time since that absurd phone call months ago, the word didn't taste bitter. It tasted done. I arrived at my wife's company's party. My wife's boss and lover snapped at security, escorted him out. I was disgraced in front of 300 employees. I didn't invite you. Why did you come? My wife smirked. Few seconds later, every screen flashed. Primary key missing. Her boss screamed, Fix it now. The whole room erupted into chaos. You ever walk into a party and instantly know you weren't supposed to be there? I'm not talking about showing up to the wrong barbecue in flip-flops when everyone else is in business casual. I'm talking about that bone-deep, stomach-dropping realization that you've just stepped into a room full of people who would rather chew glass than acknowledge your existence. Yeah, that was me tonight, walking into my wife's company anniversary gala like some kind of optimistic idiot, tux freshly pressed, because apparently I thought looking good would somehow make this less humiliating. cologne whispering expensive forgiveness into the air around me, and holding a bouquet of roses that now felt less like a romantic gesture and more like an unpaid invoice I was trying to collect on. The Grandview Hotel ballroom was one of those places that screamed, "We have money and we want you to know it," with its crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls of pretension, marble floors so polished you could probably perform open-heart surgery on them, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline that made everyone inside feel like they were masters of the universe. The whole place smelled like champagne, overpriced catering, and the distinct aroma of corporate backstabbing masked with expensive perfume. I'd been to this hotel before, back when Serena and I were actually happy, back when she dragged me to these things and introduced me as my brilliant husband, instead of pretending I was some kind of restraining order waiting to happen. The moment I stepped through those massive glass doors, the room went quiet. And I don't mean the polite kind of quiet where people pause mid-conversation to see who just arrived. I mean the kind of silence that drops like a guillotine blade, where 300 pairs of eyes suddenly lock onto you like you're a disease they're all terrified of catching. The string quartet in the corner actually hit a sour note, which honestly felt appropriate. Conversations died mid-sentence. Champagne flutes paused halfway to lips. Even the waiters stopped moving, frozen like someone had hit pause on reality itself. And there, standing near the center of it all in a dress that probably cost more than my first car, was my wife Serena, looking at me like I was a cockroach that had somehow learned to wear a tuxedo. Her face went through about 15 emotions in 2 seconds flat: surprise, annoyance, anger, calculation, and finally settling on that ice-cold mask of indifference she'd perfected over the past 6 months. Next to her, with his hand resting just a little too comfortably on the small of her back, was Eric Langford himself, her boss, her mentor, and apparently the guy who thought my marriage vows came with an expiration date and a corporate buyout clause. Eric was one of those guys who looked like he'd been genetically engineered in a lab specifically to run tech companies into the ground while somehow getting richer in the process. Mid-40s, salt and pepper hair styled within an inch of its life, a smile that had probably been focus grouped for maximum trustworthiness, and a handshake that could crush coal into diamonds while simultaneously making you feel like you owed him money. Right now, that smile was nowhere to be found. Instead, he was glaring at me like I'd just walked into his house, kicked his dog, and insulted his mother's cooking, all while tracking mud across his white carpet. "Security," he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife through butter, smooth and cold and absolutely certain of its authority. "Escort him out." I almost laughed. Actually, I did laugh. A short, sharp bark of amusement that echoed inappropriately across the now silent ballroom. Because here's the thing about Eric Langford and his perfectly orchestrated corporate events. This wasn't the first time someone had tried to remove me from a room I'd paid for. 6 months ago, it was the conference room where I'd built their entire digital infrastructure. 3 months ago, it was the office I'd worked in for 2 years without a single day off. And now it was this glittering monument to success built on the foundation I'd laid, brick by digital brick, line by line of code, while everyone else was busy networking and playing office politics. 2 security guards materialized from somewhere near the walls, both of them looking like they'd been ordered from the same catalog: broad shoulders, blank expressions, earpieces that probably connected them to some command center where someone was giving them instructions on how to remove the crazy ex-husband without causing a scene. They started moving toward me with that particular walk that security guys have, purposeful but not quite running, trying to look professional while also conveying that they were absolutely prepared to drag me out by my ankles if necessary. My wife, because she was still technically my wife, even if she'd clearly moved on to her upgrade model, finally found her voice. "I didn't invite you," Serena said, her tone dripping with that particular brand of condescension she'd developed somewhere between our last anniversary and her first business trip with Eric. "Why did you come?" It was a good question, actually. Why had I come? Was it because I still loved her, despite everything? Was it because some stupid, optimistic part of my brain thought that maybe, just maybe, showing up with flowers and wearing my best tux would somehow magically fix the smoking crater where our marriage used to be? Or was it because I knew exactly what was about to happen, and I wanted a front row seat to the show? I smiled at her. Not the warm, Genuine smile I used to reserve for her when she'd laugh at my jokes or fall asleep on my shoulder during bad movies. But something sharper, something with edges. Because you used my software to organize this event, I said, keeping my voice conversational, like we were discussing the weather or what to have for dinner, not the systematic dismantling of everything we'd built together. She blinked. Just once, but it was enough. That tiny moment of uncertainty, that flicker of something that might have been memory or realization or oh shit I forgot about, that crossing her perfectly made-up face. Her boss didn't blink, though. Eric Langford had spent too many years in boardrooms and shareholder meetings to give anything away that easily. But I saw his jaw tighten, saw the way his hand dropped from Serena's back, saw the microscopic calculation happening behind those cold, shark-like eyes. The security guards were closer now, probably debating whether to grab me immediately or wait for another signal from their boss. The entire room was watching this play out like it was the most entertaining thing that had happened at a corporate event since someone got drunk and photocopied their ass at the Christmas party. I could see phones coming out, people probably already texting their work friends about the drama unfolding, social media posts being composed in real time about the crazy husband who crashed his wife's work gala. But here's what none of them knew. What Serena had apparently forgotten in her rush to climb the corporate ladder using my back as a stepping stool. What Eric had never bothered to figure out because he was too busy thinking he was the smartest guy in every room he walked into. The system they were using to run this entire event, from the digital invitations to the automated check-in process to the presentations that were probably queued up to play on those massive screens behind the stage, all of it ran on code I'd written. Infrastructure I'd built. Architecture I designed during countless sleepless nights while Serena slept peacefully in our bed, back when she still called it our bed instead of my bed. And systems, unlike people, don't forget who their real owner is. I stood there in my pressed tux, holding my bouquet of roses like a shield, watching the security guards approach and my wife pretend not to know me and her boss try to decide whether I was a legitimate threat or just a pathetic ex-husband making a scene, and I smiled. Because in about 90 seconds, when those presentations were supposed to start, when Eric was scheduled to take the stage and talk about innovation and success and the bright future of Nexus Data Labs, every single person in this room was going to learn a very important lesson about the difference between using something and owning it. The backup, as they say, is nothing without the original. And I was definitely the original. Rewind 2 years earlier, back when I still believed in things like merit and loyalty and the idea that if you worked hard enough, people would actually appreciate what you did for them instead of stabbing you in the back with the same knife you sharpened for them. Nexus Data Labs was struggling harder than a fish out of water, gasping for air in a market that was moving faster than their outdated servers could handle. Their infrastructure was basically held together with duct tape, prayers, and the IT equivalent of crossing your fingers really hard and hoping nothing exploded during business hours. They needed something solid, something that wouldn't collapse faster than their moral compass, which I didn't realize at the time was already pretty much non-existent. So when my old college buddy Marcus, good guy, terrible judge of character, called me up and said his company was looking for someone to rebuild their entire digital backbone from scratch, I figured why not. I was freelancing anyway, living in a decent apartment in the city, spending most of my nights teaching myself new programming languages for fun because apparently I was the kind of guy who thought debugging code was a legitimate form of entertainment. I built it. From scratch. No sleep for 3 months straight. Just an unholy amount of caffeine that probably could have powered a small city. Takeout containers stacked so high they became load-bearing structures in my apartment. And the kind of stubbornness that comes from knowing you're creating something beautiful even if nobody else understands it yet. I designed a system that was elegant, efficient, and so secure it would take a team of hackers about 50 years to crack it. And that's if they knew what they were looking for. Every line of code was mine. Every security protocol, every backup system, every failsafe. I even built in redundancies for the redundancies because I'm nothing if not thorough. That's when I met Serena. She was working in their business development department, charming clients during the day and apparently charming me during those late nights when she'd bring coffee to the server room where I was basically living like some kind of code-writing hermit. She was brilliant in that way that makes you forget to breathe for a second. Sharp as hell, quick with comebacks, ambitious enough to want more than what she had, but not so ambitious that I thought she'd sacrifice everything to get it. The holy trinity of future heartbreak, as it turned out. But hindsight is 2020, and I was wearing beer goggles made of optimism and loneliness. We started dating about 4 months into the project. She'd laugh at my terrible programming jokes, the ones that only worked if you understood Boolean logic and had given up on having a normal social life. We'd grab dinner at this terrible Chinese place around the corner from the office that had probably failed 3 health inspections but made the best dumplings in the city. She told me about her dreams of making it big in tech, about proving everyone wrong who said she couldn't succeed without a computer science degree, about wanting to build something that mattered. And like an idiot, I believed we were building it together. I built the system. She built her reputation on my system. Funny how that works, right? Suddenly Serena was the golden girl of Nexus Data Labs, the one who revolutionized their digital infrastructure, according to the company newsletter that didn't bother to mention my name even once. She gave presentations using slides I'd helped her make, explaining concepts I'd spent hours teaching her over coffee and late-night phone calls, taking credit for innovations that came from my brain while I stayed in the background like a stage hand who never gets to take a bow. And then there was Eric Langford, the CEO who walked around the office like he'd personally invented the internet and was just waiting for everyone to thank him for it. When he realized I was the quiet genius behind their success, and by realized, I mean when the system nearly crashed one day and suddenly everyone remembered that, oh yeah, there's actually a guy who built this thing and maybe we should be nicer to him. He smiled that CEO smile that means, let's use him until we don't need him anymore. It's the same smile sharks probably have right before they bite. All teeth and no warmth, calculated down to the exact angle that looks friendly in photographs. Eric started inviting me to meetings, patting me on the back like we were old friends, talking about bringing me into the fold and recognizing my contributions with stock options that were basically monopoly money printed on expensive paper. He'd ask my opinion on things and then immediately do the opposite while somehow making it sound like it was my idea all along. The guy was a magician, really. He could make your value disappear while convincing you that you should be grateful for the opportunity to watch. Spoiler alert, they decided they didn't need me about 18 months later, right after I finished implementing the last major upgrade and trained their in-house team on basic maintenance. Suddenly my contract wasn't being renewed, my access was being temporarily restricted for security purposes, and Serena was coming home later and later from important meetings that apparently required her to wear perfume that cost more than our rent. But here's the thing about systems, the thing that Eric and Serena and everyone else at Nexus Data Labs didn't bother to understand because they were too busy counting their money and planning their next power play. Systems remember. They know their real owner. Every line of code I wrote had my fingerprints all over it, my logic, my way of thinking, my particular brand of problem solving that you can't just copy-paste or reverse engineer without understanding the mind that created it. I built backdoors into that system, not for anything malicious, just standard administrator access that any smart developer includes for maintenance and emergency fixes. Primary keys that only I knew about, authentication protocols that required credentials only I possessed, fail-safes that would activate if someone tried to lock me out completely. It was like building a house and keeping a master key, except this house was made of data and ran a multi-million-dollar company, and that master key was about to become very, very relevant. They thought they could use me and lose me, thought they could take my work and cut me out like I was some expendable contractor they could replace with anyone who knew how to Google Python tutorial. But the thing about building something from scratch is that it's yours in ways that go deeper than contracts or paychecks or legal ownership. It knows you. It responds to you. And when pushed, it protects you. They just didn't know that yet. The signs were there, bright and obvious as neon billboards on a highway, screaming, "Your wife is cheating on you," in letters tall enough to see from space. But like most people who don't want to believe their world is crumbling around them, I spent a solid 2 months convincing myself I was imagining things, that I was being crazy, that there had to be some perfectly reasonable explanation for why my wife was suddenly acting like a completely different person. It started with the mysterious team dinners that somehow never included me, even though I'd met most of her team, and they all seemed to think I was a pretty okay guy. Serena would get dolled up like she was going to the Oscars, not drinks with Karen from accounting and Brad from marketing, wearing dresses I'd never seen before that must have cost a fortune we supposedly didn't have. When I'd ask if I could tag along, she'd give me this look like I'd just suggested showing up to a business meeting in my underwear. It's work stuff. You'd be bored, she'd say, kissing my cheek with lips that tasted like lies and expensive lipstick. Don't wait up. Then there was the perfume. Serena had worn the same perfume since I'd met her, something light and flowery that reminded me of spring, the kind of scent that made you think of sunshine and possibilities. But suddenly, about 3 months after my contract wasn't renewed, she switched to something else entirely. Something heavier, muskier, more expensive. The kind of perfume that didn't whisper, it announced. It screamed, I'm important, I'm successful, I'm going places, in a cloud of corporate ambition that probably cost $200 an ounce. New perfume? I asked one night, trying to sound casual and probably failing miserably. Oh, this? Eric gave it to the whole executive team for hitting our quarterly targets, she said, not even looking up from her phone. Eric. Of course it was Eric. Because nothing says professional workplace gift like expensive French perfume that probably came in a box wrapped with more care than she'd shown our marriage in months. And then there was the phone. The new phone that appeared out of nowhere, sleeker and more expensive than the one she already had, which was already pretty damn nice. She guarded that thing like it contained nuclear launch codes or the secret to immortality. It never left her sight. She took it to the bathroom. She slept with it under her pillow. She'd angle it away from me when texting, fingers flying across the screen with the kind of urgency usually reserved for hostage negotiations or stock market crashes. Who are you texting? I asked one evening while we were supposedly watching a movie together, though together was generous since she'd barely looked at the screen in 45 minutes. Just work stuff, she said, that automatic response that people use when they've practiced lying so much it becomes second nature. Crisis with the Johnson account. Funny thing about the Johnson account, it didn't exist. I knew because I'd built the client database myself, and I'd spent enough time reviewing their systems to know every major account they had. But sure, Serena, tell me more about this fictional crisis that requires you to smile at your phone like it just told you a joke. When I finally confronted her, really confronted her, not the passive-aggressive hints or the casual questions, but the full, I know something's going on, and you need to tell me the truth confrontation. She didn't even have the decency to look guilty. We were in our kitchen, that kitchen where we'd cooked dinners together and laughed over terrible cooking attempts, and talked about maybe getting a dog someday, when we had more space. Now it just felt like a stage set for a play about a marriage that had already ended. We just hadn't gotten around to announcing it yet. You're paranoid, she said, loading the dishwasher with the kind of aggressive precision that meant she was definitely not paranoid, and I was definitely onto something. You've been weird ever since you stopped working at Nexus. Maybe if you got another job instead of moping around here, you wouldn't have time to invent problems. Yeah, because paranoia is totally unreasonable when your wife's late-night meetings involve candlelight and her boss's Tesla, that obnoxiously expensive silver one with the vanity plates that said Schrupt, parked outside Marcello's, the Italian place downtown that cost about $300 a meal and definitely wasn't serving the Johnson account crisis special. I knew because I'd driven past there one Thursday evening when she said she was working late at the office, and there it was, Eric's car gleaming under the streetlights like evidence in a crime scene. I didn't tell her I'd seen it. Didn't mention that I'd also noticed the credit card charges for lingerie I'd never seen her wear, or the way she'd changed her computer password from our anniversary date to something I couldn't guess, or how she'd started going to the gym at 6 in the morning when she used to complain that anything before 9 a.m. was cruel and unusual punishment. So I did what any calm, intelligent, definitely not planning revenge man would do. I waited. Quietly. With receipts. Digital ones, mostly, because that's my specialty. Bank statements, location data from the car's GPS that she forgot I had access to, calendar invites that didn't quite match up with her stories. I compiled it all like I was building a database, because essentially that's what it was, a comprehensive archive of betrayal, meticulously organized and backed up in 3 separate locations because I'm nothing if not thorough. And while she was busy building her career on the foundation of my work and Eric's sleazy mentorship, I was doing something else entirely. I was rewriting the source code. accessing those systems I'd built through back doors only I knew existed, making small changes here and there that wouldn't be noticeable until they needed to be noticed. Administrative privileges that I'd supposedly lost? Still there, just hidden better. Authentication protocols that should have locked me out? Cute, but I built those locks, and I kept the keys. Revenge wasn't exactly the plan. That makes it sound premeditated and malicious, like I was some kind of villain twirling his mustache and plotting elaborate schemes. No, this was more like insurance. A safety net. A software update that would activate when the time was right, when the universe decided that Eric and Serena needed a reminder that you can't just delete the creator from his own creation. It was just the inevitable consequence of forgetting who really owned the system they were all celebrating. And that time, as it turned out, was coming faster than they thought. Back to the party, where the champagne flowed like water and the fake laughter echoed off the marble walls like a symphony of insincerity. Everyone was dressed to the nines, wearing their success like armor, air-kissing each other's cheeks, while probably calculating whose career they could step on to climb one rung higher on the corporate ladder. This was the kind of event where people pretended to like each other for 3 hours, then went home and shit-talked everyone they'd just toasted to on their group chats. I positioned myself near the bar, partially because I needed something to do with my hands and partially because bartenders see everything and judge nothing, making them the most honest people in any room full of liars. The bartender tonight was this guy named Miguel who'd clearly worked enough corporate events to know exactly what he was looking at. A man who'd just walked into his own public humiliation and was somehow smiling about it. He poured me a sparkling water without me even asking, sliding it across the polished counter with the kind of knowing look that said, "I got you, buddy." I sipped that sparkling water like it was vintage whiskey, because someone had to stay sober enough to enjoy what was coming. And it definitely wasn't going to be the CFO, who was already 3 martinis deep and laughing too loud at jokes that weren't funny. Around me, Nexus Data Lab's finest were networking with the intensity of sharks circling chum, exchanging business cards and LinkedIn profiles like they were trading baseball cards, everyone trying to out-important each other with stories about deals they'd closed and clients they'd landed. I recognized most of them. There was Janet from HR, who'd sent me the "thank you for your service" email when they'd terminated my contract, dressed in a pantsuit that probably cost more than they'd paid me in my last month. Richard from sales was holding court near the hors d'oeuvres table, telling the same exaggerated story about landing the Peterson account that I'd heard at least 5 times, conveniently leaving out the part where the system I'd built was the only reason they could handle Peterson's data requirements. And there was Amanda, one of the junior developers I'd actually trained, who at least had the decency to look uncomfortable when she caught my eye from across the room. Then Serena made her entrance, and I swear the temperature in the room dropped about 10 degrees just from the ice in her veins. She strutted across that ballroom floor in her silver dress like she owned the place, heels clicking against marble with the confidence of someone who'd forgotten that confidence and I used to build together, back when we were a team instead of whatever legal definition our marriage had been reduced to. Her hair was done up in some complicated style that probably required an engineering degree to achieve, makeup flawless, every inch of her screaming, "I made it, and I don't need you anymore." Eric appeared at her side like a trained dog, except this dog drove a Tesla and made 7 figures a year. He had his hand on her lower back again, that possessive gesture that made my jaw clench, and they worked the room together like a presidential couple on the campaign trail, shaking hands and accepting congratulations for a success story that conveniently forgot to mention the guy who'd actually written the code that made it all possible. The string quartet switched to something triumphant and insufferable as Eric moved toward the small stage they'd set up near the massive screens. Someone handed him a microphone, and the lights dimmed slightly for dramatic effect, because apparently this wasn't just a company anniversary party. It was a TED Talk waiting to happen. Eric tapped his champagne glass with that little fork thing that rich people use to get attention, and the room obediently quieted down like school children when the principal walks in. "Ladies and gentlemen," Eric began, his voice booming through the sound system with practiced ease. "Tonight we celebrate innovation and loyalty." I almost choked on my sparkling water. Innovation? Sure, if you count stealing someone else's work as innovation. Loyalty? Coming from the guy who'd called me background noise in an email that was accidentally CC'd to me instead of just Serena, an email where he'd literally written, "We can replace him with any competent developer once the system is stable." I'd saved that email, obviously, because I'm not an idiot, and it was currently sitting in a folder labeled Receipts, along with about 40 other pieces of evidence that these people were terrible human beings. Security was still hovering near me. These two guys built like refrigerators in cheap suits, watching me like I might suddenly flip a table or start screaming profanities at the happy couple on stage. One of them, the shorter one with the buzz cut, kept touching his earpiece like he was receiving updates from Mission Control about the dangerous ex-husband situation. I gave them a friendly wave. The buzz-cut guy did not wave back. Eric continued his speech, something about building the future together and the power of teamwork and other corporate buzzwords that probably sounded profound to people who'd had too much champagne, but really just meant, we made money and we're proud of ourselves. People nodded along like he was revealing the secrets of the universe instead of reading from the same playbook every tech CEO has used since Silicon Valley became a thing. Serena stood near the stage, beaming up at Eric like he'd just discovered fire, her face a mask of admiration that I used to think was reserved for me back when I was naive enough to believe that love meant something more than convenience and career advancement. She applauded at all the right moments, laughed at his jokes that weren't actually jokes, played her role perfectly in this theater of corporate ambition. Behind them, those massive screens displayed the Nexus Data Labs logo, pulsing gently with animations that I designed during a 72-hour coding marathon fueled by energy drinks and the mistaken belief that hard work would be rewarded. The irony wasn't lost on me. Nothing about this situation was lost on me. I checked my watch. Any minute now, Eric was going to transition from his speech into the big presentation, the one where they'd showcase all their achievements and growth metrics and profit margins, all displayed through the system that apparently didn't need its creator anymore. The presentation that required administrator access to run properly, access that they thought they had but really didn't. Miguel the bartender caught my eye and raised an eyebrow, a silent question of whether I needed anything stronger than sparkling water for whatever was about to happen. I shook my head. I wanted to remember every single second of this with perfect clarity. On stage, Eric raised his glass for a toast, and 300 people raised theirs in response. A sea of champagne flutes glittering under the chandelier light, like complicit witnesses to their own upcoming disaster. To Nexus Data Labs, Eric proclaimed, his voice dripping with self-satisfaction, and to the brilliant future we're building together. I raised my sparkling water, smiling like I was in on the joke. I was the only one who knew the punchline was about to hit. Eric pointed at me again, his finger jabbing through the air like he was trying to physically push me out of the building through sheer force of will. His face had gone that particular shade of red that powerful men turn when someone has the audacity to not immediately obey them, like a tomato having an existential crisis. I said, "Escort him out." He barked at the security guards, who honestly looked like they'd rather be literally anywhere else than in the middle of this increasingly awkward domestic situation masquerading as a security threat. The two guards grabbed my arms with the kind of gentle firmness that suggested they were trying to do their jobs without actually hurting anyone or becoming YouTube famous for excessive force. "Sir, please leave quietly," the buzzcut one said, his voice surprisingly polite considering his boss was practically frothing at the mouth behind him. I looked at both of them, then at Eric, then at the 300 people watching this unfold like it was the season finale of their favorite drama series. Quietly, I laughed, the sound echoing across the now silent ballroom in a way that probably made me look unhinged. But honestly, I'd past caring about that somewhere around the time I found out my wife was screwing her boss. "Sure, I can do quiet, but you might want to back up your data first." It was such a casual comment, delivered with the kind of tone you'd use to mention that it might rain later or that the coffee was getting cold. But I saw it, that microscopic flicker of uncertainty that crossed Eric's face. The way his eyes narrowed just slightly, the mental calculation happening behind them as his brain tried to figure out if I was bluffing or if I actually had the power to do what I was implying. That's when the lights dimmed. Just slightly, just enough for people to notice, just enough for conversations to pause mid-sentence and heads to turn upward toward the chandeliers like maybe the hotel was having electrical issues. But I knew better. The hotel's electrical system was fine. It was the massive power draw from the screens behind the stage suddenly trying to load data that wasn't there anymore, processors working overtime to find files that had been quietly relocated to places only I could access. I smiled. I couldn't help it. It was like watching the first domino tip over in a chain reaction you'd spent months setting up. One of the engineers from Nexus's IT department, a nervous kid named Tyler who looked like he'd graduated college about 15 minutes ago, appeared from the wings of the stage area, his tablet clutched in his hands like a life preserver, sweat already forming on his forehead. He whispered something urgently to Eric, gesturing at his screen with the kind of frantic energy that usually precedes very bad news. Eric waved him off with the irritated dismissal of someone who'd spent his entire career believing that technical problems could be solved by simply telling them to go away. "Restart it," he said, not even looking at Tyler, still too focused on glaring at me like I was personally responsible for every inconvenience he'd ever experienced. Which, to be fair, I was about to be. Tyler scurried away like a kicked puppy, probably already texting the rest of the IT team with a message that roughly translated to "we're so screwed." I watched him go, still held by the two security guards who were getting increasingly uncomfortable with their role in this little drama. "Yeah, Eric," I said, my voice carrying across the quiet room with perfect clarity. "Restart it. That should definitely help. Have you tried turning it off and on again?" A few people actually laughed at that. Nervous, quickly suppressed laughter, but laughter nonetheless. The kind that escapes when tension gets so thick you either laugh or scream. And most people in corporate America have been trained since birth to never scream in public. Even Serena's perfectly maintained composure cracked for just a second, her eyes widening as she finally seemed to realize that maybe I hadn't shown up tonight just to cause a scene. Maybe I'd shown up for something far more calculated. The screens behind Eric, those massive displays that were supposed to show graphs and metrics and all the proof of Nexus Data Lab's incredible success, flickered once, then twice, then went completely black, like someone had pulled the plug on the entire presentation, except nobody had touched any plugs because there were no plugs to touch. Everything ran wirelessly through the system I'd built, the system that was currently deciding it didn't feel like cooperating anymore. You could have heard a pin drop in that ballroom. 300 people collectively held their breath, watching those blank screens like they were waiting for a miracle or a disaster, unable to tell which one was coming. The string quartet had stopped playing entirely, their instruments frozen mid-note, the cellist's bow hovering above her strings as she watched the chaos unfold with the fascinated detachment of someone who was getting paid either way. Tyler reappeared, practically sprinting this time, his tablet screen illuminated with what I knew, because I designed the error messages myself, was a very specific, very deliberate notification. He thrust it at Eric, pointing at something on the display, his voice rising above whisper level into the range of barely controlled panic. "Sir, something's wrong with the system," Tyler said, stating the obvious with the kind of helpful clarity that people resort to when their brain is short-circuiting. "We can't access the main servers. The backup authentication isn't working. It's like everything's locked." Eric finally tore his attention away from me to look at the tablet, his face transitioning from angry red to confused pale in about 3 seconds flat. I watched his eyes scan the screen, watched the exact moment he started to understand that this wasn't just a technical glitch or bad timing or the universe conspiring against his perfect evening. This was deliberate. This was personal. This was me. "What's happening?" Serena stammered from her position near the stage, her voice losing that confident edge she'd been carrying all night, replaced by something that almost sounded like fear. She looked at Eric, then at Tyler, then finally at me, and I saw the calculation happening behind her eyes, the pieces slowly clicking into place. I shrugged, the gesture made slightly awkward by the fact that 2 security guards were still holding my arms, though their grip had loosened considerably as they too tried to figure out what the hell was going on. "Looks like the system doesn't recognize you anymore," I said, keeping my voice conversational, like we were discussing the weather or traffic patterns instead of the complete meltdown of a multi-million-dollar company's infrastructure. "Fix it now," Eric shouted at Tyler, his voice cracking slightly on the last word, authority giving way to desperation. But Tyler just stood there, shaking his head, looking at his tablet like it had personally betrayed him. I chuckled, the sound low and genuinely amused. Can't fix it, Eric. See, here's the thing about systems. They need their primary administrator to function properly. And you just tried to throw him out of the building. That's when understanding finally dawned on Eric's face. That beautiful moment of realization when someone figures out they've made a catastrophic mistake, but it's way too late to fix it. Then it appeared, blazing across every single screen in the ballroom like the world's most expensive error message, rendered in that clinical sans serif font that somehow made it look even more damning. Primary key missing. Not system error or please wait or any of the vague, reassuring messages that usually appear when technology hiccups. No, this was specific, technical, and for anyone who understood even basic database architecture, absolutely devastating. Every single screen. The massive displays behind the stage, the smaller monitors set up around the room for overflow viewing, even the digital sign by the entrance that had been cycling through the evening's agenda. All of them now showed the same message, pulsing gently like a heartbeat, like the system itself was announcing its own death. The CFO, Thomas something or other, a guy who'd probably never written a line of code in his life, but loved to talk about leveraging synergies and optimizing workflows, dropped his martini glass. Tablets came out. Phones were frantically unlocked, and I could see them forming an impromptu crisis huddle, their voices rising in that particular pitch that technical people use when something has gone catastrophically wrong, and they're trying to figure out whose fault it is before management does. Tyler was typing so fast on his tablet, I thought his fingers might catch fire, his face illuminated by the screen's glow as he pulled up diagnostics and system logs and probably every troubleshooting guide he'd ever bookmarked. Next to him, Sarah from cybersecurity, a woman I'd actually respected back when I worked there because she was one of the few people who'd actually understood what I was building, had gone completely white, her expression suggesting she'd just realized the magnitude of what they were dealing with. This isn't possible, she muttered, loud enough for people around her to hear. The backup systems should have kicked in. The redundancies should have prevented this. Unless. She trailed off, her eyes widening as she looked up from her device and locked eyes with me across the room. She knew. Of all the people in this building, Sarah was probably the only one besides me who understood exactly what primary key missing meant, and more importantly, what it meant that no backup was working. Someone in the crowd, one of the investors based on his expensive watch and the way he carried himself like money was his first language, shouted, "What does that mean? What's a primary key?" His companion, a woman in a red dress who'd been laughing at Eric's jokes 5 minutes ago, tried to explain. It's like the master password, the main access point. She looked around for confirmation, but the tech team was too busy having coordinated mental breakdowns to educate the masses on database architecture. Another investor, this older gentleman who I recognized from the board meetings I used to sit in on back when they pretended to value my input, pulled out his phone. "I'm calling my broker," he announced to no one in particular. "If their systems are down, their stock is going to tank tomorrow." That started a chain reaction. Suddenly, everyone with Nexus Data Labs stock, which was most of the room, considering they'd gone public 8 months ago in an IPO that had been called the tech success story of the year by several financial publications, was pulling out their phones, making calls, sending texts, probably triggering sell orders before the news hit the wider market. The soft glow of phone screens illuminated the ballroom like a constellation of tiny warnings that the ship was sinking and the rats were already swimming for shore. Janet from HR, the same Janet who'd sent me that "thank you for your service" email without a trace of actual gratitude, was trying to maintain some semblance of control. "Everyone please remain calm," she called out in that practiced HR voice that's supposed to be soothing, but just makes everyone more anxious. "I'm sure this is just a minor technical difficulty." But even she didn't sound convinced, and the way she kept glancing at Eric with increasing panic suggested she was already mentally updating her own resume. Near the hors d'oeuvres table, which was now completely abandoned because apparently caviar loses its appeal when your company is imploding, Richard from sales was having a very animated conversation on his phone. "No, don't sign the contract yet," he was saying, his voice carrying across the room. "Just wait until tomorrow. Something's come up." The something in question being the complete and total failure of the infrastructure that made their entire business model possible, But sure, Richard, undersell it a little more. Amanda, the junior developer I trained, finally worked up the courage to approach the security guards who were still technically holding me, though at this point it was more like we were all standing together watching the same disaster movie. She said hesitantly, looking at me with an expression that mixed guilt, understanding, and what might have been a tiny bit of admiration. Is this my fault? I finished for her, smiling. No, Amanda, this is their fault. I just stopped preventing the inevitable. She nodded slowly, like she was processing something she'd suspected but never confirmed, then backed away to rejoin her panicking colleagues. At least she'd had the decency to acknowledge me, which was more than most of them had done when they'd escorted me out 3 months ago. The string quartet, bless them, tried to resume playing, some light classical number that was probably meant to calm everyone down, but gave up after about 30 seconds when it became clear that nobody was listening and the vibe had shifted from elegant corporate celebration to Titanic after it hit the iceberg. Eric's face had transitioned through several colors in rapid succession: red, pale, purple, and now settling on a kind of grayish tone that suggested his blood pressure was doing things blood pressure definitely shouldn't do. He was barking orders at Tyler and the tech team, but they were all talking over each other, a cacophony of technical jargon and increasingly desperate suggestions. Reboot everything. We don't have admin access. What about the cloud backup? The cloud backup requires authentication from the primary server, which is locked, Sarah finished, her voice flat with the resignation of someone who'd just realized they were completely, utterly screwed. Serena stood frozen near the stage, her silver dress now looking less like a fashion statement and more like a costume for a play that had gone horribly wrong. She was staring at the screens with an expression I couldn't quite read. Shock, certainly, but also something else. Recognition, maybe. The slow dawning understanding that the quiet guy in the background, the one she'd helped push out, the one whose work she'd built her reputation on, had just proven exactly how essential he'd been all along. The buzzcut security guard finally let go of my arm completely. Sir, he said quietly, I think maybe we should let him stay. His partner nodded in agreement. Yeah, something tells me he's not the problem here. I appreciated their evolving understanding of the situation. It restored a little bit of my faith in humanity, or at least in security guards who were smarter than the people paying them. Miguel, still behind the bar because apparently bartenders stay at their posts no matter what kind of chaos unfolds, caught my eye and gave me a slight nod of respect. He'd seen a lot of things in his career, but this was probably going to be a story he told at other gigs for years. The time I watched a guy single-handedly destroy a tech company with an error message. Someone from accounting, I think her name was Patricia, actually started crying. My stock options, she sobbed to her colleague. I was going to buy a house. Her colleague, trying to be comforting but clearly panicking himself, patted her shoulder. Maybe it's temporary. Maybe they can fix it. But they couldn't fix it. That was the beautiful, terrifying, absolutely perfect part. Every person in that tech team knew it, even if they weren't ready to admit it yet. You can't fix a system that's been locked by the person who built it, not without his cooperation, not without the credentials and access that only he possessed. They could try to rebuild from scratch, sure, but that would take months, maybe years, and in the meantime, every transaction, every client interaction, every piece of data that Nexus Data Labs needed to function, all of it was trapped behind a door that only I had the key to. Eric finally turned back to me, his expression a mixture of rage and something that might have been desperation if he'd been humble enough to feel desperate. Our eyes met across the ballroom, across the wreckage of his perfect evening, across the smoking ruins of the empire he thought he'd built. You, he said, the single word carrying more venom than I'd thought possible. You did this. I raised my glass of sparkling water in a mock toast, smiled my best smile, the one I usually reserve for ironic situations and karmic justice. No, Eric, you did this. I just stopped cleaning up your mess. And that's when the real panic began. Panic spread through that ballroom like wildfire through a drought-stricken forest, fast and merciless and absolutely unstoppable. What had started as confused murmuring escalated into full-blown chaos in about 30 seconds flat, which honestly might be a record for corporate meltdown speed. I should check the Guinness Book for that one. The phone started ringing first, not the cell phones that everyone was already clutching like lifelines, but the actual business lines that people apparently still carried because they thought it made them look important. The sound was cacophonous, a symphony of different ringtones, all competing for attention, each one probably bringing worse news than the last. I watched as face after face went pale, as voices rose in pitch and urgency, as the reality of what was happening spread from person to person like the world's worst game of telephone. The payment portal is down, someone shouted from near the entrance, a guy in a gray suit who I vaguely recognized as being from the finance department. He had his phone pressed so hard against his ear I thought he might accidentally merge with it. Clients can't process transactions. They're calling the emergency line and nobody can help them because we can't access the system. That was met with another wave of panic. See, Nexus Data Labs wasn't just some random tech company playing with apps and social media algorithms. They processed actual financial transactions for actual clients who moved actual money. Lots of it. When your entire business model depends on being able to facilitate secure data transfers and your system suddenly decides to take an unscheduled vacation, that's not just embarrassing. That's the kind of thing that gets you sued, investigated, and potentially shut down by multiple regulatory agencies who are very interested in why you can't protect your client's data. Near the stage, Tyler had been joined by what looked like the entire IT department, all of them crowded around tablets and laptops that had been hastily set up on a table meant for champagne flutes. Their faces were illuminated by screen glow, making them look like characters in a horror movie, which honestly wasn't that far from the truth. They were typing frantically, pulling up command prompts and diagnostic tools, probably running through every troubleshooting protocol they'd ever learned in their computer science degrees and finding absolutely nothing that worked. "Try the secondary authentication," one of them shouted. I think it was Marcus, the guy who'd originally gotten me this gig back when we were friends, and he didn't realize he was hiring the instrument of his company's destruction. "Already did," Tyler shot back, his voice cracking with stress. "It requires administrator approval, which requires credentials we don't have," Sarah finished, slamming her laptop shut with enough force that several people nearby flinched. She ran her hands through her hair, destroying the professional styling she'd probably spent an hour on this morning. "This is insane. Every single failsafe, every backup protocol, every redundancy system, they all route back to the primary administrator access. And we don't have it. We never actually had it." The implications of that statement rippled through the tech team like a shockwave. They all turned, almost in unison, to look at Eric, who was still standing near the stage looking like he'd been personally betrayed by the concept of technology itself. His expensive suit was rumpled now, his perfectly styled hair had been run through with anxious fingers enough times that it stuck up in weird angles, and there was a visible sweat stain spreading under his arms that his designer fabric was doing its best, but failing to hide. "What do you mean we never had it?" Eric demanded, his voice hitting that dangerous pitch that powerful men use when they're about to fire someone and want everyone to know they're very serious and very angry about being made to look stupid. Sarah actually laughed, a sharp, slightly hysterical sound. "I mean exactly what I said, Eric. The administrator access you thought you had? It was provisional, limited. It only worked because the actual administrator." She pointed directly at me, and suddenly every eye in the room followed her finger like I was the star witness in a murder trial. "Allowed it to work. He built in master overrides that superseded everything. And now that he's revoked that access, we're locked out of our own system." You could have heard a pin drop. Actually, you could have heard a feather drop. Hell, you could have heard someone thinking about dropping something and deciding against it. One of the younger engineers, a kid fresh out of MIT, who probably still had his graduation tassel hanging from his rearview mirror, stood up so fast his chair fell backwards. "The backup," he practically shouted, like he'd just solved world hunger and cured cancer simultaneously. "We have comprehensive backups. We can restore from those and rebuild the access." For about 3 seconds, hope flickered across the faces of everyone from Nexus Data Labs. Eric actually straightened up, his expression shifting from defeated to cautiously optimistic. Serena, still frozen in her silver dress like a very expensive statue, took a step forward. Even some of the investors stopped their panicked phone calls to listen. Then Sarah, bless her technical accuracy and inability to sugarcoat reality, shook her head. The backups are encrypted, she said flatly. They require authentication from the primary server to decrypt, which requires administrator access. The MIT kid finished, his face falling as the brief spark of hope extinguished like someone had thrown a bucket of ice water on it. He picked up his chair and sat back down with the defeated slump of someone who'd just realized they were completely and utterly screwed. The backup is useless without the original administrator, Tyler yelled, his voice carrying across the ballroom with the kind of clarity that usually requires a microphone. It wasn't directed at anyone in particular, more like he was yelling at the universe itself, at the fundamental unfairness of a situation where they'd built their entire company on someone else's foundation and then acted surprised when they couldn't operate without him. The phrase echoed across the room, bouncing off those marble walls and crystal chandeliers, settling into the consciousness of every person who'd ever taken credit for work they didn't do or pushed out someone they thought was expendable. The backup is nothing without the original. It was almost poetic, really. A metaphor so perfect it could have been a bumper sticker or one of those motivational posters that tech companies love to hang in their break rooms. Except this one was less about inspiration and more about karmic justice served cold. Serena's face turned ghost white, every trace of color draining from her complexion until she looked like she might actually pass out. She grabbed the edge of the stage for support, her knuckles going white with the pressure. Her eyes found mine across the room, and for the first time since I'd walked through those doors tonight, I saw something that wasn't contempt or indifference. I saw fear. Raw, genuine, oh God, what have I done fear. Eric had started sweating profusely now, his expensive cologne mixing with the smell of panic in a combination that probably violated several Geneva Convention protocols. He pulled out his phone, hands shaking slightly as he tried to dial someone. Probably his lawyer, maybe his PR team, possibly a priest, because at this point divine intervention might be his best option. But before he could complete the call, his phone rang first. The look on his face when he saw the caller ID suggested it was not good news. Hello, he answered, his voice trying for authoritative and landing somewhere around desperate. Yes, this is Eric Langford. What? No, we're experiencing a temporary. He was cut off by whoever was on the other end, and I watched his face cycle through several more shades of panic. I understand that, but another interruption. We're working on it right now, I assure you. More talking from the other end that I couldn't hear, but could definitely interpret based on Eric's increasingly frantic expression. 24 hours? We can't possibly. The person on the other end apparently didn't care what he could or couldn't do, because Eric's shoulders sagged in defeat. Yes, I understand. We'll do everything we can. He hung up and looked around at the assembled chaos like a captain watching his ship sink. That was the Thornton Group, he said to no one and everyone simultaneously. They're threatening to pull their contract if we don't have systems operational within 24 hours. That's 40% of our revenue. The ballroom erupted into fresh chaos. 40% of revenue disappearing would tank the company faster than you could say bankruptcy filing. More phones came out, more panicked conversations began. More people started doing the mental math on how quickly they could find new jobs before this mess hit their resumes. I remained exactly where I was, leaning against the bar with my sparkling water, watching the dominoes continue to fall in exactly the pattern I predicted they would. Miguel the bartender was watching too, occasionally shaking his head with the weary understanding of someone who'd served drinks at enough corporate events to know that karma was real and she was savage. You know, I said, loud enough for the people near me to hear, my voice cutting through the chaos with casual observation. Maybe next time you should back up your morals before your data. Might have saved you some trouble. There was a beat of stunned silence, and then something unexpected happened. People actually laughed. Not everyone. Eric certainly didn't, and Serena looked like she might throw up, but enough people that it carried across the room. Quiet laughter, uncomfortable laughter. The kind that escapes when a situation is so absurd and terrible that your brain doesn't know how else to process it. Some of it was definitely nervous energy, but some of it, I think, was genuine appreciation for the poetry of the moment. Even a few of the Nexus employees cracked smiles, quickly hidden, but definitely there. Turns out when you treat people like disposable resources, they're not super upset when karma catches up with management. I raised my glass of sparkling water. to the room, to the chaos, to the beautiful catastrophe unfolding before me like a symphony I'd composed but never had to play. To poetic justice, I announced, may she always remember the people who forgot to read the fine print. Several people actually clinked their glasses with mine as I held it up, including one of the investors who apparently had a sense of humor about losing money, or maybe just appreciated a well-executed revenge plot when he saw one. The meltdown was complete. The system was down. The company was crumbling. And for the first time in months, I felt absolutely, perfectly at peace. Was making my way toward the exit, because honestly there was nothing left to see here except grown adults having coordinated panic attacks, when Eric materialized in front of me like a very angry, very sweaty ghost. He must have pushed through about 30 people to get to me that fast, leaving a wake of startled guests and probably a few spilled drinks. His face was inches from mine, close enough that I could smell the desperation mixed with whatever expensive aftershave he'd doused himself in this morning when he thought tonight was going to be his triumphant celebration. "What did you do?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous, like he thought intimidation would somehow work on the guy who'd just brought his entire company to its knees with a few lines of code. "What the hell did you do to my system?" I actually smiled at that. Couldn't help it. "Your system?" I repeated, letting the words hang in the air between us like a challenge. "That's interesting. See, I didn't do anything, Eric. I really didn't. You just removed the wrong guy." His jaw clenched so hard I thought he might crack a molar, and honestly that would have been icing on the cake at this point. "Don't play games with me," he hissed. "This is sabotage. This is illegal. I'll have you arrested for." "For what?" I interrupted, keeping my voice calm and reasonable, which I could tell was pissing him off even more than if I'd been yelling. "For revoking my own administrator access to a system I built? For protecting intellectual property that belongs to me? Go ahead, call the cops. I'll wait." I made a show of checking my watch. "Should I call them for you? I've got nothing but time now that I'm unemployed and all." "The system belongs to the company," Eric shouted, loud enough that several conversations around us stopped as people turned to watch this confrontation unfold. His face had gone that deep purple color again, the one that suggested his blood pressure was doing things his doctor would definitely not approve of. "You were paid to develop it. That makes it company property." I reached into my jacket pocket, moving slowly because the security guards were still hovering nearby, and I didn't want them getting jumpy, and pulled out my phone. A few swipes, and I had what I needed. The document I'd been carrying around like a lucky charm for the past 3 months. The one piece of leverage I'd known would eventually become relevant. "Actually," I said, turning the phone so he could see the screen, "that's not quite how it works." On the display was the original startup contract, the one I'd signed back when Nexus Data Labs was just a struggling company desperate for someone to build them something that wouldn't fall apart. I'd been young and naive, but not stupid enough to sign away all my rights, so I'd included a clause, buried in the legal jargon where most people don't bother to read, that specified intellectual property ownership would be shared, with the creator maintaining primary administrative rights. "See this?" I pointed at the relevant paragraph, highlighted in yellow for easy reference. "This says that the infrastructure belongs to its creator." That would be me. And this part here. I scrolled down, pointing to another section. "This says primary administrative access cannot be transferred without written consent of the creator." Guess who signed it first? Guess who never gave written consent to transfer that access? Eric's face drained of color faster than water down a drain, going from angry purple to corpse pale in about 2 seconds. His eyes scanned the document, his lips moving slightly as he read, and I watched in real time as he realized just how badly his legal team had screwed up. Or maybe they hadn't screwed up at all. Maybe he'd just never bothered to read the fine print, too confident in his own importance to think that a contract with some freelance developer would ever come back to bite him. "This can't be legal," he stammered, but his voice had lost all its conviction. "Our lawyers would have caught this." "They would have." "Would have what?" I asked. "Actually read the contract?" "Yeah, that would have been smart. But see, your lawyers were probably more focused on protecting the company from external threats. They never imagined the threat would come from the guy you thought was too insignificant to matter." Behind Eric, I could see Serena pushing through the crowd, her silver dress catching the light as she moved with the kind of urgency that suggested she'd finally understood the magnitude of what was happening. She reached us just as Eric was opening his mouth to respond, probably to threaten me with more legal action that wouldn't go anywhere, and she did something I hadn't expected. She grabbed my arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my jacket sleeve, her face a mask of desperation that I'd never seen before. The Ice Queen had melted, and what was left was someone who'd just realized her entire carefully constructed career was built on a foundation that was actively crumbling beneath her feet. "Can't you fix this?" she whispered, her voice so quiet I almost didn't hear it over the chaos in the ballroom. "Please, please fix it. We can work something out. We can talk about this." I looked down at her hand on my arm, then up at her face, and something inside me that used to love her, that used to believe we were partners, that used to think she was worth building a life with, felt absolutely nothing. Just a hollow space where affection used to live. "Funny," I said, gently removing her hand from my arm like I was peeling off a piece of tape. "That's the first time you've said please since our wedding." "Actually, no. You said please when you wanted me to cover for you with your mother about that business trip to San Francisco. The one where you stayed at the Four Seasons with Eric." I saw her flinch at that, saw the confirmation in her eyes even though she didn't say anything. "But please fix your career? Please save the reputation you built on my work? That's a new one." "I never meant," she started, but I was already turning away, already walking toward those glass doors that led out of this glittering nightmare and into the cool night air that suddenly seemed a lot more appealing than anything inside this building. Eric's voice rose behind me, sharp with panic. "You can't just leave. We need to fix this. Name your price. Anything. Just name it." I paused at the doors, looked back at the scene I was leaving behind, the chaos, the panic, the important people who suddenly weren't so important anymore, and smiled. "My price is watching you realize that some people aren't for sale, Eric. Some people actually meant it when they said marriage vows. Some people don't build their success by stepping on everyone who helped them. And some people remember who their friends were before they got too important to return phone calls." I pushed through the doors while Eric screamed into his phone like it was a lifeline, his voice echoing across the marble and crystal and expensive devastation. But it wasn't a lifeline. It was just another piece of technology that couldn't save him from the consequences of his own actions. Not anymore. As I reached those massive glass doors, something unexpected happened. Something that I definitely hadn't planned for, but was going to replay in my head for years to come like the world's most satisfying movie scene. Applause broke out behind me. Actual, genuine, sustained applause that started somewhere near the back of the ballroom and rippled forward like a wave, building in volume until it filled the entire space with the kind of sound usually reserved for rock concerts and standing ovations. Not for Eric, not for Serena, not for the company that was currently experiencing a meltdown of biblical proportions. For me, for the guy who'd been escorted out of meetings, dismissed as background noise, and treated like his contributions were as forgettable as yesterday's weather forecast. I stopped with my hand on the door handle, turned around, and just soaked it in. 300 employees who had watched me get humiliated, who'd seen me built up just enough to be torn down, who'd witnessed Serena parade around with Eric while I became the office ghost story that people didn't talk about in polite company. They were all clapping. Some of them were even standing, their champagne flutes forgotten on tables and trays, their faces showing expressions that ranged from respect to barely suppressed glee. The buzzcut security guard who'd tried to escort me out earlier was clapping too, a huge grin on his face. His partner had his hands cupped around his mouth and actually shouted, "Hell yeah," which probably violated about 17 company policies, but who was going to enforce those now? Janet from HR? She was too busy having an existential crisis near the stage. Amanda, the junior developer I'd trained, was clapping so hard her hands had to hurt. Next to her, Marcus, my old college buddy who'd gotten me into this mess in the first place, gave me a salute that was part respect, part apology, and entirely deserved. Even some of the investors were clapping, including the older gentleman who'd threatened to call his broker earlier. He raised his glass to me with a nod that suggested he appreciated a well-executed power play when he saw one, even if it was costing him money. Miguel the bartender was doing the slow clap, the kind you see in movies when someone's about to give an inspiring speech, except this wasn't a movie, and there was no speech. Just me, standing in a doorway, watching the people who'd forgotten I existed suddenly remember exactly how much they'd needed me all along. Even the DJ looked impressed, and this was a guy who probably spun at corporate events 3 times a week and thought he'd seen everything. He actually stopped the ambient music he'd been playing, because apparently he'd kept working through the entire system meltdown like the professional he was, and the sudden silence made the applause even more dramatic. His playlist had nothing on my timing, and from the look on his face, he knew it. Eric wasn't clapping. He was standing near the stage with his phone pressed to his ear, gesturing wildly with his free hand, while presumably getting screamed at by another client or investor, or possibly his mother, who would definitely be disappointed in how this evening had turned out. Serena wasn't clapping either. She'd sunk into one of those ridiculously expensive chairs they'd rented for the event, her silver dress pooling around her like liquid mercury, her face buried in her hands in a pose that would have made a great album cover for a country song about regret and poor life choices. Tyler and the tech team weren't clapping because they were too busy frantically typing on their laptops, probably trying to find some miraculous workaround that didn't exist, but a few of them looked up long enough to give me nods of acknowledgement. Sarah actually stopped what she was doing to give me a full standing ovation, and I appreciated that. She'd always been one of the good ones, someone who understood that systems were built by people, not manifested out of thin air by CEO charisma and quarterly earnings reports. I gave the room a small bow. Nothing too dramatic, just enough to acknowledge that yes, I was aware of the applause, and yes, I was absolutely savoring every second of it. Then I pushed through those doors and stepped out into the night, leaving behind the crystal chandeliers and marble floors and the sound of 300 people who just learned a very valuable lesson about reading contracts and treating people like human beings instead of disposable resources. Outside, the night air felt different. Lighter. Honest. The kind of air that doesn't lie to you about late-night meetings or team dinners or business trips to San Francisco. The October breeze carried the smell of the city, exhaust fumes, street food from the vendors that set up on the corner, that indefinable scent that big cities have that's somehow both grimy and alive. And it was infinitely more appealing than the expensive catering and fake politeness I'd just left behind. The valet parking attendant, a young guy who probably made minimum wage to stand outside in the cold and fetch cars for people who thought tipping was optional, watched me emerge from the gala with wide eyes. Sir? Do you need your car?" he asked hesitantly, probably wondering if I was about to cause a scene in his section of the world too. "Yeah," I said, handing him my ticket. "And you might want to stay out here for the next hour or so. It's about to get real messy in there." He glanced at the glass doors, through which you could still see the chaos unfolding in the ballroom, and nodded slowly. "Worse than it already is?" "So much worse," I confirmed, and slipped him a 20 because he'd been polite and seemed like a decent kid who deserved a heads up about the exodus that was probably going to happen when people started fleeing this disaster like rats from a sinking ship. My phone, which I'd silenced during the festivities because I'd wanted to enjoy the show without distractions, suddenly started buzzing like it was having a seizure. Notifications poured in so fast the screen couldn't keep up. Texts, emails, LinkedIn messages, even a couple of voicemails from numbers I didn't recognize. I pulled it out and started scrolling through the chaos. Job offers. Holy shit, the job offers. At least 10 of them already. From companies ranging from startups to massive tech corporations. All of them apparently having heard through the industry grapevine about what had just gone down at the Grandview Hotel. News traveled fast in Silicon Valley, and news about a developer taking down an entire company by revoking his own access traveled at light speed. Saw what happened at Nexus. Very interested in discussing opportunities. Name your price. That was from TechCore, a company I'd interviewed with last year before deciding to go with Nexus because Serena had been so excited about us working in the same building. "We need someone who actually understands system security. Are you available?" DataBridge Industries, offering a 6-figure salary right there in the text message like they were afraid someone else would snap me up first. Partnership deals, consulting offers, even a message from a venture capitalist who wanted to fund whatever I wanted to build next, because apparently publicly destroying your former employer's infrastructure was the new way to prove you were worth investing in. The tech industry was weird, but I wasn't complaining. And then, buried in the avalanche of professional opportunities and congratulations from people I barely knew. There was one text from Serena. Just 4 words. We need to talk. I stared at it for a long moment, standing there on the sidewalk while the valet went to get my car, the sounds of the city humming around me like a soundtrack to my newfound freedom. We need to talk. The classic phrase of someone who'd realized they'd screwed up, but wasn't quite ready to admit it out loud. The opening line of a conversation that would probably involve apologies and excuses and justifications for why she'd done what she'd done, all wrapped up in the kind of emotional manipulation that people use when they want you to forget they'd stabbed you in the back. I could have responded with a lot of things. I could have written a long message about trust and betrayal and how she'd taken the foundation we built together and used it to elevate herself while pushing me down. I could have told her exactly how many nights I'd spent lying awake wondering what I'd done wrong, what I could have done differently, how I could have been better, before finally realizing that none of it was my fault and all of it was her choice. Instead, I opened my photos, found the screenshot I'd taken earlier of those massive screens displaying their error message, and sent it to her without any commentary. Just the image, primary key missing, rendered in that cold, clinical font against a black background. Some metaphors write themselves, and this one didn't need any explanation. The backup was nothing without the original. The system didn't work without its creator. The foundation crumbles when you remove the person who built it, and then act surprised when everything falls apart. 3 dots appeared immediately, showing she was typing a response. Then they disappeared, then appeared again, then disappeared again. Whatever she was trying to say, she couldn't find the words. And honestly, that was probably the most honest communication we'd had in months. My car arrived, the valet hopping out and holding the door open with a knowing smile that suggested he'd figured out I was somehow responsible for whatever disaster was unfolding inside. I tipped him another 20, slid into the driver's seat, and took one last look at the Grandview Hotel, at the glass doors and marble facade, and all that expensive architecture that housed expensive people having expensive problems. Then I drove away, leaving behind the wreckage of their success story and the ruins of my marriage, heading toward whatever came next with a phone full of opportunities and a heart that was finally starting to feel lighter than it had in months. Exit, stage left. The show was over, and I'd gotten my standing ovation. As I reached those massive glass doors, something unexpected happened. Something that I definitely hadn't planned for, but was going to replay in my head for years to come like the world's most satisfying movie scene. Applause broke out behind me. Actual, genuine, sustained applause that started somewhere near the back of the ballroom and rippled forward like a wave, building in volume until it filled the entire space with the kind of sound usually reserved for rock concerts and standing ovations. Not for Eric, not for Serena, not for the company that was currently experiencing a meltdown of biblical proportions. For me, for the guy who'd been escorted out of meetings, dismissed as background noise, and treated like his contributions were as forgettable as yesterday's weather forecast. I stopped with my hand on the door handle, turned around, and just soaked it in. 300 employees who had watched me get humiliated, who'd seen me built up just enough to be torn down, who'd witnessed Serena parade around with Eric while I became the office ghost story that people didn't talk about in polite company. They were all clapping. Some of them were even standing, their champagne flutes forgotten on tables and trays, their faces showing expressions that ranged from respect to barely suppressed glee. The buzzcut security guard who'd tried to escort me out earlier was clapping too, a huge grin on his face. His partner had his hands cupped around his mouth and actually shouted, "Hell yeah," which probably violated about 17 company policies, but who was going to enforce those now? Janet from HR? She was too busy having an existential crisis near the stage. Amanda, the junior developer I'd trained, was clapping so hard her hands had to hurt. Next to her, Marcus, my old college buddy who'd gotten me into this mess in the first place, gave me a salute that was part respect, part apology, and entirely deserved. Even some of the investors were clapping, including the older gentleman who'd threatened to call his broker earlier. He raised his glass to me with a nod that suggested he appreciated a well-executed power play when he saw one, even if it was costing him money. Miguel the bartender was doing the slow clap, the kind you see in movies when someone's about to give an inspiring speech, except this wasn't a movie and there was no speech. Just me, standing in a doorway, Watching the people who'd forgotten I existed suddenly remember exactly how much they'd needed me all along. Even the DJ looked impressed, and this was a guy who probably spun at corporate events 3 times a week and thought he'd seen everything. He actually stopped the ambient music he'd been playing, because apparently he'd kept working through the entire system meltdown like the professional he was, and the sudden silence made the applause even more dramatic. His playlist had nothing on my timing, and from the look on his face, he knew it. Eric wasn't clapping. He was standing near the stage with his phone pressed to his ear, gesturing wildly with his free hand, while presumably getting screamed at by another client or investor, or possibly his mother, who would definitely be disappointed in how this evening had turned out. Serena wasn't clapping either. She'd sunk into one of those ridiculously expensive chairs they'd rented for the event, her silver dress pooling around her like liquid mercury, her face buried in her hands in a pose that would have made a great album cover for a country song about regret and poor life choices. Tyler and the tech team weren't clapping because they were too busy frantically typing on their laptops, probably trying to find some miraculous workaround that didn't exist, but a few of them looked up long enough to give me nods of acknowledgement. Sarah actually stopped what she was doing to give me a full standing ovation, and I appreciated that. She'd always been one of the good ones, someone who understood that systems were built by people, not manifested out of thin air by CEO charisma and quarterly earnings reports. I gave the room a small bow, nothing too dramatic, just enough to acknowledge that yes, I was aware of the applause, and yes, I was absolutely savoring every second of it. Then I pushed through those doors and stepped out into the night, leaving behind the crystal chandeliers and marble floors and the sound of 300 people who just learned a very valuable lesson about reading contracts and treating people like human beings instead of disposable resources. Outside, the night air felt different. Lighter. Honest. The kind of air that doesn't lie to you about late-night meetings or team dinners or business trips to San Francisco. The October breeze carried the smell of the city, exhaust fumes, street food from the vendors that set up on the corner, that indefinable scent that big cities have that's somehow both grimy and alive. And it was infinitely more appealing than the expensive catering and fake politeness I'd just left behind. The valet parking attendant, a young guy who probably made minimum wage to stand outside in the cold and fetch cars for people who thought tipping was optional, watched me emerge from the gala with wide eyes. Sir? Do you need your car?" he asked hesitantly, probably wondering if I was about to cause a scene in his section of the world too. "Yeah," I said, handing him my ticket. "And you might want to stay out here for the next hour or so. It's about to get real messy in there." He glanced at the glass doors, through which you could still see the chaos unfolding in the ballroom, and nodded slowly. "Worse than it already is?" "So much worse," I confirmed, and slipped him a 20 because he'd been polite and seemed like a decent kid who deserved a heads up about the exodus that was probably going to happen when people started fleeing this disaster like rats from a sinking ship. My phone, which I'd silenced during the festivities because I'd wanted to enjoy the show without distractions, suddenly started buzzing like it was having a seizure. Notifications poured in so fast the screen couldn't keep up. Texts, emails, LinkedIn messages, even a couple of voicemails from numbers I didn't recognize. I pulled it out and started scrolling through the chaos. Job offers. Holy shit, the job offers. At least 10 of them already. From companies ranging from startups to massive tech corporations. All of them apparently having heard through the industry grapevine about what had just gone down at the Grandview Hotel. News traveled fast in Silicon Valley, and news about a developer taking down an entire company by revoking his own access traveled at light speed. Saw what happened at Nexus. Very interested in discussing opportunities. Name your price. That was from TechCore, a company I'd interviewed with last year before deciding to go with Nexus because Serena had been so excited about us working in the same building. "We need someone who actually understands system security. Are you available?" DataBridge Industries, offering a 6-figure salary right there in the text message like they were afraid someone else would snap me up first. Partnership deals, consulting offers, even a message from a venture capitalist who wanted to fund whatever I wanted to build next, because apparently publicly destroying your former employer's infrastructure was the new way to prove you were worth investing in. The tech industry was weird, but I wasn't complaining. And then, buried in the avalanche of professional opportunities and congratulations from people I barely knew, there was one text from Serena. Just 4 words. We need to talk. I stared at it for a long moment, standing there on the sidewalk while the valet went to get my car, the sounds of the city humming around me like a soundtrack to my newfound freedom. We need to talk. The classic phrase of someone who'd realized they'd screwed up, but wasn't quite ready to admit it out loud. The opening line of a conversation that would probably involve apologies and excuses and justifications for why she'd done what she'd done, all wrapped up in the kind of emotional manipulation that people use when they want you to forget they'd stabbed you in the back. I could have responded with a lot of things. I could have written a long message about trust and betrayal and how she'd taken the foundation we built together and used it to elevate herself while pushing me down. I could have told her exactly how many nights I'd spent lying awake wondering what I'd done wrong, what I could have done differently, how I could have been better, before finally realizing that none of it was my fault and all of it was her choice. Instead, I opened my photos, found the screenshot I'd taken earlier of those massive screens displaying their error message, and sent it to her without any commentary. Just the image, primary key missing, rendered in that cold, clinical font against a black background. Some metaphors write themselves, and this one didn't need any explanation. The backup was nothing without the original. The system didn't work without its creator. The foundation crumbles when you remove the person who built it, and then act surprised when everything falls apart. 3 dots appeared immediately, showing she was typing a response. Then they disappeared, then appeared again, then disappeared again. Whatever she was trying to say, she couldn't find the words, and honestly that was probably the most honest communication we'd had in months. My car arrived, the valet hopping out and holding the door open with a knowing smile that suggested he'd figured out I was somehow responsible for whatever disaster was unfolding inside. I tipped him another 20, slid into the driver's seat, and took one last look at the Grandview Hotel, at the glass doors and marble facade, and all that expensive architecture that housed expensive people having expensive problems. Then I drove away, leaving behind the wreckage of their success story and the ruins of my marriage, heading toward whatever came next with a phone full of opportunities and a heart that was finally starting to feel lighter than it had in months. Exit, stage left. The show was over, and I'd gotten my standing ovation. As I reached those massive glass doors, something unexpected happened. Something that I definitely hadn't planned for, but was going to replay in my head for years to come like the world's most satisfying movie scene. Applause broke out behind me. Actual, genuine, sustained applause that started somewhere near the back of the ballroom and rippled forward like a wave, building in volume until it filled the entire space with the kind of sound usually reserved for rock concerts and standing ovations. Not for Eric. Not for Serena. Not for the company that was currently experiencing a meltdown of biblical proportions. For me. For the guy who'd been escorted out of meetings, dismissed as background noise, and treated like his contributions were as forgettable as yesterday's weather forecast. I stopped with my hand on the door handle, turned around, and just soaked it in. 300 employees who had watched me get humiliated, who'd seen me built up just enough to be torn down, who'd witnessed Serena parade around with Eric while I became the office ghost story that people didn't talk about in polite company. They were all clapping. Some of them were even standing, their champagne flutes forgotten on tables and trays, their faces showing expressions that ranged from respect to barely suppressed glee. The buzzcut security guard who'd tried to escort me out earlier was clapping too, a huge grin on his face. His partner had his hands cupped around his mouth and actually shouted, "Hell yeah," which probably violated about 17 company policies, but who was going to enforce those now? Janet from HR? She was too busy having an existential crisis near the stage. Amanda, the junior developer I trained, was clapping so hard her hands had to hurt. Next to her, Marcus, my old college buddy who'd gotten me into this mess in the first place, gave me a salute that was part respect, part apology, and entirely deserved. Even some of the investors were clapping, including the older gentleman who'd threatened to call his broker earlier. He raised his glass to me with a nod that suggested he appreciated a well-executed power play when he saw one, even if it was costing him money. Miguel the bartender was doing the slow clap, the kind you see in movies when someone's about to give an inspiring speech, except this wasn't a movie and there was no speech. Just me, standing in a doorway, watching the people who'd forgotten I existed suddenly remember exactly how much they'd needed me all along. Even the DJ looked impressed, And this was a guy who probably spun at corporate events 3 times a week and thought he'd seen everything. He actually stopped the ambient music he'd been playing, because apparently he'd kept working through the entire system meltdown like the professional he was. And the sudden silence made the applause even more dramatic. His playlist had nothing on my timing, and from the look on his face, he knew it. Eric wasn't clapping. He was standing near the stage with his phone pressed to his ear, gesturing wildly with his free hand, while presumably getting screamed at by another client or investor, or possibly his mother, who would definitely be disappointed in how this evening had turned out. Serena wasn't clapping either. She'd sunk into one of those ridiculously expensive chairs they'd rented for the event, her silver dress pooling around her like liquid mercury, her face buried in her hands in a pose that would have made a great album cover for a country song about regret and poor life choices. Tyler and the tech team weren't clapping because they were too busy frantically typing on their laptops, probably trying to find some miraculous workaround that didn't exist, but a few of them looked up long enough to give me nods of acknowledgement. Sarah actually stopped what she was doing to give me a full standing ovation, and I appreciated that. She'd always been one of the good ones, someone who understood that systems were built by people, not manifested out of thin air by CEO charisma and quarterly earnings reports. I gave the room a small bow, nothing too dramatic, just enough to acknowledge that yes, I was aware of the applause, and yes, I was absolutely savoring every second of it. Then I pushed through those doors and stepped out into the night, leaving behind the crystal chandeliers and marble floors and the sound of 300 people who just learned a very valuable lesson about reading contracts and treating people like human beings instead of disposable resources. Outside, the night air felt different. Lighter, honest, the kind of air that doesn't lie to you about late-night meetings or team dinners or business trips to San Francisco. The October breeze carried the smell of the city, exhaust fumes, street food from the vendors that set up on the corner, that indefinable scent that big cities have that's somehow both grimy and alive. And it was infinitely more appealing than the expensive catering and fake politeness I'd just left behind. The valet parking attendant, a young guy who probably made minimum wage to stand outside in the cold and fetch cars for people who thought tipping was optional, watched me emerge from the gala with wide eyes. Sir, do you need your car?" he asked hesitantly, probably wondering if I was about to cause a scene in his section of the world too. "Yeah," I said, handing him my ticket. "And you might want to stay out here for the next hour or so. It's about to get real messy in there." He glanced at the glass doors, through which you could still see the chaos unfolding in the ballroom, and nodded slowly. "Worse than it already is?" "So much worse," I confirmed, and slipped him a 20 because he'd been polite and seemed like a decent kid who deserved a heads up about the exodus that was probably going to happen when people started fleeing this disaster like rats from a sinking ship. My phone, which I'd silenced during the festivities because I'd wanted to enjoy the show without distractions, suddenly started buzzing like it was having a seizure. Notifications poured in so fast the screen couldn't keep up. Texts, emails, LinkedIn messages, even a couple of voicemails from numbers I didn't recognize. I pulled it out and started scrolling through the chaos. Job offers. Holy shit, the job offers. At least 10 of them already. From companies ranging from startups to massive tech corporations. All of them apparently having heard through the industry grapevine about what had just gone down at the Grandview Hotel. News traveled fast in Silicon Valley, and news about a developer taking down an entire company by revoking his own access traveled at light speed. Saw what happened at Nexus. Very interested in discussing opportunities. Name your price. That was from TechCore, a company I'd interviewed with last year before deciding to go with Nexus because Serena had been so excited about us working in the same building. "We need someone who actually understands system security. Are you available?" DataBridge Industries, offering a 6-figure salary right there in the text message like they were afraid someone else would snap me up first. Partnership deals, consulting offers, even a message from a venture capitalist who wanted to fund whatever I wanted to build next, because apparently publicly destroying your former employer's infrastructure was the new way to prove you were worth investing in. The tech industry was weird, but I wasn't complaining. And then, buried in the avalanche of professional opportunities and congratulations from people I barely knew, there was one text from Serena. Just 4 words. "We need to talk." I stared at it for a long moment, standing there on the sidewalk while the valet went to get my car, the sounds of the city humming around me like a soundtrack to my newfound freedom. "We need to talk." The classic phrase of someone who'd realized they'd screwed up, but wasn't quite ready to admit it out loud. The opening line of a conversation that would probably involve apologies and excuses and justifications for why she'd done what she'd done, all wrapped up in the kind of emotional manipulation that people use when they want you to forget they'd stabbed you in the back. I could have responded with a lot of things. I could have written a long message about trust and betrayal and how she'd taken the foundation we built together and used it to elevate herself while pushing me down. I could have told her exactly how many nights I'd spent lying awake wondering what I'd done wrong, what I could have done differently, how I could have been better, before finally realizing that none of it was my fault and all of it was her choice. Instead, I opened my photos, found the screenshot I'd taken earlier of those massive screens displaying their error message, and sent it to her without any commentary. Just the image, primary key missing, rendered in that cold, clinical font against a black background. Some metaphors write themselves, and this one didn't need any explanation. The backup was nothing without the original. The system didn't work without its creator. The foundation crumbles when you remove the person who built it, and then act surprised when everything falls apart. 3 dots appeared immediately, showing she was typing a response. Then they disappeared, then appeared again, then disappeared again. Whatever she was trying to say, she couldn't find the words, and honestly that was probably the most honest communication we'd had in months. My car arrived, the valet hopping out and holding the door open with a knowing smile that suggested he'd figured out I was somehow responsible for whatever disaster was unfolding inside. I tipped him another 20, slid into the driver's seat, and took one last look at the Grandview Hotel, at the glass doors and marble facade, and all that expensive architecture that housed expensive people having expensive problems. Then I drove away, leaving behind the wreckage of their success story and the ruins of my marriage, heading toward whatever came next with a phone full of opportunities and a heart that was finally starting to feel lighter than it had in months. Exit, stage left. The show was over, and I'd gotten my standing ovation. By the next morning, every financial paper, tech blog, and business news outlet was screaming the same headline with slightly different variations of corporate panic. Langford Industries crashes, internal sabotage suspected. Tech giant Nexus Data Labs experiences catastrophic system failure. CEO Eric Langford under investigation following anniversary gala disaster. My personal favorite was from TechCrunch. When your infrastructure walks out, the cautionary tale of Nexus Data Labs. I sat at my kitchen table, the one I'd bought from IKEA 3 years ago when Serena and I first moved in together, and I'd spent 4 hours assembling it wrong before starting over, watching the sunrise paint the city in shades of orange and gold while my coffee maker gurgled its morning symphony. My apartment felt different now, not emptier exactly, but cleaner somehow, like I'd finally opened all the windows and let the stale air out. The photos of Serena still sat on the shelf, but they looked like artifacts from someone else's life, memories belonging to a version of me that no longer existed. I poured myself a cup of coffee, dark and bitter the way I liked it now instead of the sugary caramel monstrosity Serena used to make fun of me for ordering at Starbucks, and turned on the news. CNN had already picked up the story, running it as their business segment with one of those serious-faced anchors who probably didn't understand half the technical terms she was reading off the teleprompter but was doing her best to look concerned about it. Sources say the company's entire digital infrastructure went offline during what was supposed to be a celebration of their 5th anniversary. The anchor reported, her expression suggesting this was somehow both tragic and mildly scandalous. Multiple clients have already filed complaints with regulatory agencies, and stock prices have plummeted nearly 40% since markets opened this morning. Representatives from Nexus Data Labs were not available for comment, but an internal email leaked to our producers suggests the company is currently unable to access its own systems. I smiled into my coffee mug. Unable to access its own systems. That was one way to put it. Another way would be locked out of the house they thought they owned because they forgot the guy with the keys wasn't actually optional. But corporate speak was never good at admitting fault in clear terms. My phone rang. The display showing Leo's name and his contact photo that was still a picture from our college days when we both had significantly more hair and significantly less understanding of how the real world worked. I answered on the second ring. already grinning because I knew exactly what this call was going to be about. Man, you really logged them out of reality. Leo's voice came through the speaker, loud and delighted and absolutely loving every second of this drama. He'd been my best friend since freshman year when we'd bonded over debugging code at 3 a.m. and arguing about whether tabs or spaces were superior for indentation. I saw the news this morning and I literally spit out my cereal. That was you, wasn't it? Tell me that was you. I don't know what you're talking about, I said, keeping my voice innocently neutral. I just attended a party I wasn't invited to. Whatever happened after that was purely coincidental. Bullshit, Leo laughed. Purely coincidental, my ass. Dude, you're a legend. The entire tech community is talking about this. There are memes already. Someone made a GIF of that primary key missing error message with the caption, "When you forget who built your empire." It's got like 50,000 shares. Really? I pulled up Twitter on my laptop, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, and sure enough, hashtag primary key missing was trending nationally. People were applying it to everything from bad relationships to forgetting passwords to that existential feeling when you realize you've lost something important but can't remember what. It had transcended the original context and become a cultural moment, which was both hilarious and slightly surreal. Guess they should have read the terms and conditions, I said, echoing what I'd told Leo last night when he'd called at midnight, having heard through the grapevine that something massive was going down at the Grandview Hotel. Leo was quiet for a second, then his voice softened slightly, losing some of the excitement and gaining something more sincere. But seriously, how are you doing? I know this whole thing with Serena has been rough. I looked around my apartment, at the space that was slowly becoming just mine again instead of ours. Honestly, better than I've been in months. It's weird, but watching everything fall apart last night felt like closure. Like the universe finally caught up to the scoreboard and realized they'd been crediting the wrong player for all the points. That's deep, man. Very philosophical. Very logged out of toxic relationships and into personal growth. Shut up. I laughed, but it was genuine laughter, the kind I hadn't experienced in a while. The kind that came from actually finding something funny instead of just going through the motions of seeming happy. After I hung up with Leo, I spent the next hour doing something I probably should have done months ago. I went through my phone, my laptop, my cloud storage, and I started deleting photos of Serena and me at company events where she smiled at the camera while mentally calculating her next career move. Screenshots of sweet text messages that turned out to be lies wrapped in emojis. The folder labeled Us that contained 3 years of memories that now felt like evidence in a case I'd already won. Delete, delete, delete. Each one felt like dropping weight I'd been carrying without realizing how heavy it had gotten. Somewhere in that glass tower downtown, in offices that were probably in full crisis mode with emergency meetings and lawyers and PR specialists trying to spin this disaster into something manageable, Serena was realizing something I'd known for months. The difference between power and ownership. She'd had power, the influence, the reputation, the corner office with the nice view. But I'd had ownership, the foundation, the infrastructure, the actual substance that made everything else possible. The backup was nothing without the original. Not just for computer systems, but for relationships, for careers, for any success story built on someone else's work. You can't just extract the value from someone, discard them, and expect everything to keep functioning like they never mattered. Eventually, the system recognizes its creator and refuses to work for anyone else. My phone buzzed again. Another job offer, this one from a startup offering equity and creative control and the kind of respect I should have demanded from the beginning. I added it to the list I'd started last night, a spreadsheet of opportunities that was growing faster than I could review them. Funny how quickly your value becomes apparent when people realize they can't just take it for granted anymore. I deleted another photo, this one from our wedding, both of us smiling like we believed in forever, and felt nothing but relief. That version of me, the one who thought love meant sacrifice and compromise and accepting less than I deserved, had been successfully uninstalled. Time for the upgrade. I opened a new document on my laptop, titled it, "What's Next?" and started making plans. Not revenge plans this time, but actual future plans. Projects I wanted to build, companies I wanted to work with, maybe even starting my own thing where I wouldn't have to worry about someone else taking credit for my code. Life 2.0 was downloading. And this version came with better security protocols, stronger boundaries, and a much clearer understanding of my own worth. Outside my window, the city was waking up, going about its business, completely unaware that somewhere in a corporate boardroom, powerful people were learning a very expensive lesson about reading contracts and treating people with basic human decency. The sun was shining, my coffee was still hot, and for the first time in a very long time, I had absolutely no idea what came next. And that uncertainty felt a lot like freedom.